morning. We're going to start.
Quiet, please. Thank you.
Okay, this is the public hearing of the Committee of the Whole regarding bills number 180, 162, 180, 163, 180, 164, and resolution number 180, 185. Mr. Stitt, please read the titles of the bills and resolution.
Bill number 180162, an ordinance to adopt a capital program for the 6 fiscal years 2019 through 2024 inclusive. Bill number 180163, an ordinance to adopt a fiscal 2019 capital budget. Bill number 180164, an ordinance adopting the operating budget for fiscal year 2019. Resolution number 180185, resolution providing for the approval by the Council of the City of Philadelphia of a revised 5-year financial plan for the City of Philadelphia covering fiscal years 2019 through 2023 and incorporating proposed changes with respect to fiscal year 2018, which is to be submitted by the Mayor to the Pennsylvania Intergovernmental Cooperation Authority, the Authority, pursuant to the Intergovernmental Cooperation Agreement authorized by an ordinance of this Council approved by the Mayor on January 3, 1992, Bill number 1563-A, by and between the City and the Authority.
Thank you, Mr. Stitt. Today we continue the public hearing of the Committee of the Whole to consider the bills read by the clerk that constitute proposed operating and capital spending measures for fiscal 2019, a capital program, and a forward-looking capital plan for fiscal 2019 through fiscal 2024. Today we will hear testimony from the following departments: Finance Department, City Treasurer, Sinking Fund, Board of Pensions, Retirement, and later today, we will have public testimony starting around 5. The first person to testify from the administration is
Rob Dubow.
Thank you very much. Good morning. Please state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony.
Rob Dubow, I'm Director of Finance. Joining me today is Kathy Pastor, First Deputy Director of Finance. We also have representatives from all the divisions in Finance who are available to answer any questions. So you have my written testimony. I'll just give you kind of a quick highlight of the requests and then go right to questions. So the FY19 general fund budget, it totals about $1.7 billion. It's an increase of $130 million roughly over FY18 estimated obligations. It includes an increase of $54 million in Class 100 costs. And that's primarily for pensions and health benefits, and $73 million in Class 500. And that is primarily an increase for the contribution to the school district. Direct contributions to the Finance Department core budget total about $14.4 million. It's a decrease of $119,000. Our Class 100 shows a slight increase, mainly the result of moving one Philly staff from capital budget to the general fund. And with that, I'll end my testimony.
All right.
Happy to take any questions.
Mr. Dubow, you always have the best testimony of the budget season, short and sweet. Thank you so much for that. Actually, can you have the treasurer come up? And
Sure.
It's a question that I need both of you all to. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. So, I'm going to ask this question. Treasurer, directly related to, but indirectly finance. So, we've been working on this loan program, and as a part of the housing preservation initiatives, Councilwoman Parker and myself had sponsored a bill. There's a portion where we all worked together and we borrowed money, and the grant basic systems repair program is working quite well, aggressively reducing the backlog and moving ahead on new applications. And the second phase of that was this loan product that we believe should be a part of the preservation initiative, because there are a lot of people who make just a little bit above the traditional BSRP qualifications, but they're in these neighborhoods that are, Councilwoman Parker likes to call them middle neighborhoods where housing stock is starting to decline. And the issue was to get an extremely below interest loan product in addition to which a credit score that would be more beneficial to the people that we're trying to reach. So I would like to get a sense of, I'm going to ask you this question. You know I already know the answer, but I got to ask the question and set up the real question. So where are we at with that loan product?
Again, good morning. Rashia Johnson, City Treasurer.
Pull over closer.
So there was an RFP process for banking institutions, and that was run through the PRA and shortlisted in its summary. So right now we're just trying to fine-tune what the actual program is, because there's some expenses and that we just need to tweak to make sure there's a cost benefit. And actually, as I actually stated last week, there is an internal meeting that we have to get the Director of Finance, Rob, up to speed. So the PRA, Treasurer's Office, Finance, and our meeting actually next week just to kind of go through the program, where it is and what it stands with the lending institutions, and see if we can shave some of the expenses where we can to make it more beneficial to the recipients of the program.
All right, talk to me about some of those, not incidental, but those costs associated with the administration of the program.
Well, two respondents of the RFP, they have a per loan cost, and right now, based upon the number of loans and the size, we estimate that the cost, if we ran it just as it is without doing some negotiations with them, could be upwards of over 30% of the $40 million, and we think that's not serving that population where it should be at those levels. We'd like to get that reduced as much as possible.
So 30% in administrative costs.
That's correct.
What's
A little over 30%.
What's the normal cost associated with a loan product under a traditional loan, prime loan, 4 or 5%, whatever that? What's the traditional cost?
A little less than that, but I can't estimate. But I mean, that to take 30% of $40 million, that's money, administrative money and that's not even to say get the interest rate to where you want to be, where you want it to be per the ordinance and things of that nature. This is just for them participating in the program.
Okay, but I'm saying if you don't know what the normal cost is under the traditional loan for home repairs or whatever else you need it for with respect to your property, how can you determine that what's being asked for this particular program is excessive?
And I'm not saying that it is excessive. I'm just at this point we're doing diligence.
Yeah, but if that's the what's holding us back from proceeding, I mean, don't you think we should know what the normal fee would be for any type of loan?
And
I'm getting that's the, and as I said, I've talked to you before.
Right, we've had this conversation, and it's not, I won't say it's hold up, but it's more diligence of learning, okay, these are what their fees are, let's find out, and that's why we have a conversation, because the administration is ready to actually do the bonds. We have professionals ready to do it, but we just want to make sure that we have the program right where we want it to be, and then we can go into the market.
What's the cost associated with a traditional loan?
I would have to get back to you with that.
That's important.
Okay.
I mean, seriously.
Fair enough.
Before the day? I mean, that's just
yes.
a simple matter of calling over to one of these banks down here. All right? So can you, because you'll be up next, right?
I'll have it when I get up next, yes.
All right. And you're going to have internal conversation with the finance director?
We always just update the finance director as to where we are with the program before we go out into the market. That's correct.
And we have a meeting scheduled to go over this
Yes.
particular.
You got a meeting scheduled?
Yes, it is.
All right,
It's
'cause
actually Monday.
All right. And PHFA, they're in the loop?
PRA, yes, they're part of the meeting.
PHFA.
PHFA.
Yeah, we've been talking to PHFA, Brian Hudson.
I have not had conversations
You're not a part
with
of that conversation? No. All right, because they do a loan product in this
Okay.
state. All right. Okay. I just wanted to, since I have you two up here, 'cause
Okay.
this is something that's very important, and the newspapers already said that we were doing it, and I'm kind of want to catch up to the newspaper. All right. Thank you, Treasurer. Mr. DeBoe, so, during the budget message, there was a number put out for the school district deficit. I think, what was the original number, like 980?
906.
It was 908, 906?
906 was the
This
deficit
is the
amount.
original number?
Yeah, and 980 was the package that we put together to fund the district.
Okay.
So to close that gap and to leave them with a little
So
fund
we were
balance. too.
proposing 980 for a 906
Correct, so that they
Deficit.
wouldn't be at exactly zero, that they would have some fund balance.
little fund balance, okay. So then we dropped to 660, and I'm assuming this was based on the school district's information relating to the increase in appraisals?
Correct. That's right. So they built into that number the increase in assessed values, I think the impact both on the property tax and on the UNO.
All right, so what, in terms of the appraisal, I'm just trying to understand how this works, because we don't usually have that large a swing in a relatively short period of time from the time that we announced the initial increase, which, you know, some of us, I'm sure you all got a lot of flack from the proposed 6% tax increase, and our phones were burning up.
Right.
And then down to now, I think it's 4.1.
Correct.
From mechanically, how does that work? How do you get to a point where you give a budget message that talks about a particular anticipated revenue stream, and then relatively shortly thereafter you have a significant increase in that revenue
Right.
stream? I
It's
mean, how do
a
you,
timing issue in that, you know, the budget is due early March. The certification of the assessments is due end of March. So those numbers aren't available till after the budget address is done. So we're using an estimate in the budget process, but when OPA does their assessments, they're looking at individual properties. They're not actually looking at what the total is. So they don't really give us a good number about the total till kind of right when they're finished, which is later in March.
so is that a flaw in the OPA process, or a
No, it's state
flaw
law.
in the timing? I mean, that's,
It's state,
I don't-
right. It's state law that requires them to certify March 31st.
right?
For them, kind of the later the better, because these are assessments that are going to be used for taxes for a year from now. So they've built their process to be finished at the end of March, which gives them as much time as possible to be kind of as close as possible to the date when the taxes will actually be levied on those homes.
Okay. Have we ever had, like,
We had this issue
Something like
last
this.
year, too.
pardon me?
We had the same issue last year, which is when we set up the reserve for
that big
federal
a swing?
funding. Yes,
I guess we didn't ask for a tax increase, so
we did not, so it got less attention.
it wasn't,
yes.
wasn't
Right.
as
Yeah.
prominent. All right. Okay. So, let me see, I'm over my time. Real quick, Homestead. Well, you know, let me ask you this question. What's the number? I think I asked it in the earlier testimony in the 5-year plan. Without any increase in the rate, counting just the appraisals, what would be the number in terms of additional revenue towards the school district?
I think it would be about, I have to get, so there's 197 from the increase appraisals, but I have to see how that treats the homestead.
192.
192.
Young guys' minds are a little sharper than us older guys, you know.
Well, he's looking at a piece of paper.
I understand. He's looking at his paper.
That's
All
right.
That's fair point. So 192 was the appraised number.
Yes.
Any increase in UNO as a result of
I
that?
think there's probably about a $50 million increase in UNO. We
50
can get
million?
back to you with an exact, 50 over the 5 years. But we can
5
get back
years?
to you with an exact
Okay.
number.
Okay. And we will adjust. And do we have a sense of what the threshold will be for the break-even point? In terms of
So,
winners and losers?
I know we
Use
had
that
this
term.
conversation last week,
Yeah.
and it's hard because everyone's going to have a different increase in their assessed value. We looked at the median, which is 128.1, and looked at what an increase would have to be for it to be a break even, and it's about 8.7%. So if your assessed value went up 8.7% and you were at the median, and you had a homestead, you would break even.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I'm way over my time. Chair recognizes Councilman Jones.
I was welcoming my colleague back into the country.
I understand.
So, she's got her passport stamped. Good morning.
Morning.
How are you? I'm going to take a page from my good friend and colleague, Councilman Dom, and ask about collections. I wanted to know, you are focusing on a centralized collection system that is going to be able to get different departments that have fees and that, so that there is one source of getting those receivables paid to the city. Can you tell me how we're doing on that?
So we have a data warehouse that's being implemented, and we already are starting to use it. It doesn't have all collections in it. We're adding, I think we added OAR, we're adding next, I think. We added trash fee. That was kind of the last big one that went in, but we can get from revenue kind of a schedule of what's in and what else is going
And
in.
I'm with a particular eye towards improving those collection percentages.
Right.
And here's why I think it's important. I made mention, and in fact, did a resolution, and it was passed, about the way we itemize our bills.
Yes.
If you recall, have we made any progress on that?
We have. You're talking about the receipt? Yes, so there's a receipt now that people get, and the Revenue Commissioner has shown it to me, so I think it does actually kind of show what you wanted it to show, but so I'm sure he'll actually have that with him when he comes for his hearing.
I would hope so.
Yes.
After a couple of budget cycles, we've been real patient, but I think
Yeah.
it's important. Not only the senior citizen who does not quite know how their dollar is applied to a bill, whether it's penalty, whether it's interest, how much does it reduce the principal of whatever the debt is, but clearly spelling that out, how it's applied, helps. There was a column in one of our revenue tax items. It showed principal, it showed interest, it showed penalty, and then there was a mystery column that said other. And when they asked me, well, what is other and how is it applied, I had no answer to that. And I'm hoping that maybe you do.
It's other. I don't know.
So it was
Yeah.
a significant other, not
was it?
as in
Okay.
a relationship. It was a huge amount.
And this was on a property tax bill?
Yeah, this was on a property tax receipt where the individual had made an agreement with the city. And so we clearly understand principal,
Right.
clearly understand penalty and interest. We did not understand other.
Okay, yeah.
And so
it's,
I would like you to take a look at
Yep.
that. A couple of other quick points. By way of the reciprocal relationship, one of the issues that Councilman Dom, other than some of his tax relief pieces that for poor people, but he also, there was an issue at least 2 budget cycles ago where we're trying to get reciprocity with other municipalities within Pennsylvania about real estate liens and being able to collect on them. The scenario is, I live in Potter County, but I own principal real estate in North Philadelphia. I don't pay my taxes in North Philadelphia, but I'm current in Potter County. The owner doesn't care, or will run the gauntlet and risk of getting that property put up for sheriff's sale in Philadelphia County, but would never let that happen to his property on Potter County. How have we made progress getting reciprocity with the other municipalities?
So I think there was actually, think it was state legislation that allows us to do that, to put liens on properties in other counties, and I know we've started to do that. I don't have the details of the number of times we've done it, but we have started that process, so it's another collection tool that we use.
So I think that will have significant motivation, add significant motivation. If I live on the main line, and now, my property values, I can't sell that property, there's liens placed on that property, I think it's going to really help us. And I want to see,
Yeah.
I know it's early to measure, but I want us to look at that particular measurement to see if it's having the desired effect.
Yeah, we'll make sure that when revenue comes, they're able to speak to that.
All right. So switching gears real quick, and my bell has not runneth over, so okay. How are we doing? I really am uncomfortable saying anything positive about Donald Trump. I don't want to get in the habit of doing that at all. But one thing that we cannot deny is his impact, most recently bad, but going over the last 24 months on Wall Street. How has that helped our pension situation?
So I also don't want to give him any credit, particularly after what's happened
It's a
to the
painful
market
thing.
in the last month. So we had a really good year last year. The fiscal year ending last June 30th, our returns were 12.9% roughly for the year. This year we were doing really well until the last couple of months, and then a number of factors, including fear of a trade war, rising interest rates, some of the kind of uncertainty around technology stocks has led the market to go down pretty dramatically. With some days, like this, today, it was up over 100 the last time I looked. But so the positive that it had last year is now kind of turning into a little bit of a struggle. We're still, before this week, we were still about 6.6% year to date. And our target as of last week was moved from 7.7, which I heard for this year, to 7.65. So we need to kind of earn another % or so for the year to make our target.
So how does that help with our projected fully funding the pension? What was the year that we were shooting for, Mr. President? 2023?
No, 2031.
2031.
Yeah.
So how,
Yeah.
how
Exactly, yes, yeah.
so how are we?
So when we beat our earnings assumption, it helps. It means that we have more assets in the fund, so it closes our unfunded liability. So it's helped with that. We'll have to see kind of what the rest of this year looks like.
So I'll be looking forward to some specifics about that to see how we're doing. It was a big issue for us in deciding some of our split in revenues that we were receiving. So I was wondering, every time I look at the Wall Street.
So that split in revenue has been actually a really big help, dedicating some of the sales tax revenue to the pension fund. We're projecting that over the life of this plan, that's worth about $290 million for the pension fund. So that's one of the things that really is helping make sure we get to 80% funded by 2031. That's been a very good thing.
Our credit rating, did
Yes.
the pension fund have anything to do with that adjustment?
Yeah, there are a number of things that S&P raised when it talked about the reasons for reducing our rating. One is definitely our fixed costs, including our pension costs. One is our fund balances, which are much smaller than other similarly rated cities. And then there was uncertainty about what's going to happen with the school district. So all those things together were kind of the things that they really focused on.
So what is the impact on cost of money?
Probably not much, because they had us rated higher than the other two agencies. After this downgrade, they're still as high as the higher of the other two, and your costs are typically driven by your lowest rating. So probably won't have that big an impact, but it's still, you don't want to get downgraded.
So you'll provide those collection information, the Revenue Commission.
With revenue, when they come, yeah, they'll have
And
that.
they will also provide that itemized receipt
Yes.
information when it comes.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Councilman. Right on point.
That was well timed.
Yeah. Chair recognizes Councilman Dom.
Thank you, Council President. Good morning.
Good morning.
I have several questions. I'm sure I'm going to not make it through round one with all of them, but I want to go back to Councilman Jones's question about the tax collection.
Yes.
And I just want to kind of quantify, I look at the Revenue Department, and I think Commissioner Breslin has said this to me, that it's like a toolkit. You have different tools in the kit, whether it's sequestration, where we're taking rents from investors who don't pay, or it's going after suburbanites who own Philadelphia properties who don't pay. There's all different tools in the toolkit.
Right.
And one of the tools that we introduced, or a bill that I introduced, would give you, the Revenue Department, the tool to do tax collection, and it's carved out so that no owner-occupants would be affected. It would strictly be for commercial, industrial, multifamily, and investors. And I guess I want to verify some statistics that I talked about last week, which are that the last information I received, we had 67,000 delinquent properties. We had 16,000 that we believe to be owner-occupant, and 51,000 that are not.
And the commissioner last week
Confirmed it.
agreed with that, right?
So based on that, and based on our collection rate right now, which is an all-time high of 95.5, I believe it is.
That's right.
And that means we're 4.5 points, not at 100. Assuming that 3/4 of the debt is not owner-occupied, but others commercial, industrial, do you think it's realistic if the tax collection that we've been talking about, that I've introduced, were put in place, that we can increase our collection rates around 2 points?
So I think kind of any additional tool helps. I don't know how to quantify whether, it's 0.5%, 1%, or 2%. But, additional tools, if used appropriately, always help.
Because, if you think about it, if 3/4 are not owner-occupied, and that tool works marginally well, that should equate to 2 points. Where I'm going with this is because each point under the new money that we raise, 2 points will raise about $30 million a year. And if we look at that in the 5-year plan, that's $150 million that we don't need to raise taxes for.
Right. I think the other thing is you'd have to look at the kind of the frequency. You're talking about a lien sale, the frequency at which you do it, because you probably wind up not doing it every year.
Right.
So that spike is probably in every other year.
But if you increase your collection rate from 95.5 to 97.5, my point is you're increasing by 2 points. Each point's worth roughly $15 million a year. 2
That
points per
sounds
year
about
is
right,
$30
right.
million. Over 5 years, it's $150 million.
Yeah, if you got there right away, that's the math.
That's
Yeah.
the math, okay. So I'll put that on the side for a minute. I want to talk about the prisons for a second. Do you know, and I know this isn't directly you, but does the prison department have a chief financial officer, CFO?
They have financial staff, yes.
And do they need help in that area?
I think, lots of departments could use help, so I'm not going to say no.
Because my way of thinking is we need to support, I think Commissioner Carney does a good job. We need to support her with a really strong CFO, because I'm going to repeat the numbers because they are staggering to me. In 2008, we had 9,400 people in prison. 2 years ago, we had 8,200. And by the way, this is positive. This MacArthur grant's phenomenal, and it's positive. And I heard, was it last week, I was shocked. I think Julie Wertheimer said there was 5,600 people in our city prisons right now.
I think that's a projection. I think we're higher than that, but that's a...
Because she did mention 5,600.
Yeah, I think it was a projection.
Okay. And we're probably headed to 5,000 or maybe even lower.
Chair recognizes Councilman Jones.
Yes, just a point of information, Councilman, that number fluctuates daily. At that snapshot, that was correct, but with weather permitting and seasonal, it'll fluctuate up and down. But your point is well taken. We went from a 9,000 enrollment down to an all-time low of 5,600 on State Road. In part, thank you, Mr. President, for
Thank you.
laser beam focusing on that issue.
Thank you.
And by the way,
Commissioner Tisdale.
that's phenomenal. And when I visited the prisons on December 28th, I remember speaking to several people. One stood out. She had a speeding ticket at the end of August for 101 miles an hour, which is fast. But she's still been in prison, and her system hasn't processed her out. This was from December. And I think there's a lot of that backlog, but that's a separate conversation. I want to hit the budget for a minute. The prison budget's $270. With fringe, it's $370. And I think, Rob, you told me that half of that we have to pay no matter what. It's pension liability.
Right.
I learned that. So I'm going to stay with $320 million. If we had a 32% drop in our population, heading to a 40% drop from the 82, not even the 9, I can't see why we can't carve 15%, close one prison, 15% out of the prison budget. 15% of 320 is $48 million a year. Over 5 years, it's $240 million. I mean, between the tax collection and the prison, we have $390 million. Our tax increases don't have to be what we've been talking about. There's a lot of money here that we need to focus on. That's why I'm asking about that CFO.
Yeah, and I think, we've talked a lot about some of the things that drive prison costs, like the per inmate health costs, the change in nutrition standards that hit the food costs. And I think one of the things we also talked about is having that study done, and I know there's an RFP out to
I know there's an
look at that.
RFP, but I will say this, because it was quoted in the paper, so I have to bring this up. I can't let it go. If I had 6 buildings and 2 are vacant, I don't need a doorman in the vacant buildings. Shut them down. We should authorize you guys to shut a prison. We went from 8,200 to 56. We have 6 prisons. We should shut down the House of Corrections and make further cuts. We went from an average cost of $39,000 2 years ago to today $57,000, heading to like $64,000 per prisoner. There's no way that makes economic sense. No way.
And it is our goal, obviously, to close a facility.
I know, and what I'm saying is I think Commissioner Carney, who's doing a good job, needs more financial support. We need to support her with people of I'm going to use Matt Stitt as an example just to call him out. A person of that caliber going in there could save us tremendous amount of money.
You want to go over?
I want to put that out there because I think that's a big area where we could save money. Let me ask you a question on the union contracts. I know you can't talk too much about them, but any status on DC 47 and the fire contracts?
We're continuing conversations, is really all I can say.
That's the political answer. Okay. And there was RFPs out this year, I guess, for CVS, Caremark, and Independence Blue Cross. They went out in 2017. Did we incur any savings on these renewals?
I think those are for health benefits, so we can find out, or OHR can talk about, Human Resources can talk about that when they come.
Let me ask a delicate question.
Oh, what question? Sorry.
A delicate one.
Yeah.
In the area in the private world, every year, when a company has an increase in the health costs, the employee pays the percentage of the increase. We've had our health costs for employees fixed for like 5 or 6 years. We haven't increased it at all.
I know we make changes every year in the benefit plan or in co-pays and contributions to limit our increases.
Here's the numbers I have. You can check them. We have $18.77 per month for an individual, and a family is $160.74. It hasn't changed.
Yeah, and we've looked at savings in other ways through plan design, so we have held those costs relatively flat over time, but just in a different way.
Okay. I just think if you increase those numbers by the same percentage we're getting hit, we did the math, it's like $25 million over 5 years. Just the inflation rate that we get hit, raise those deductibles by the same rate. Everyone has to share in that cost.
Right, and the way we're sharing is through plan design, so we're just getting at it a different way. We're doing the same thing in terms of cost, net cost to the city, just with a different approach.
Okay. All right. I think my time's up, so I'll come back. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilman. By the way, Mr. Stitt said he appreciates the confidence in you, but he's not going anywhere. Okay. Councilwoman Gimm, please.
Yes. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I also, too, want to go on the record as saying that I would like to keep Matt Stitt in City Council, and as much as I'm sure that the Prisons Department would love to have you, we're going to try and keep you here. Make sure that you feel valued here. So I wanted to say good morning. And,
Morning.
we are now in a pretty vigorous debate about the budget, and especially its importance as it relates back to school funding. And, I know we're going to get into a lot more detail about the specifics of how we fund our schools, but I wanted to open up by talking a little bit about the value of school funding. I think that there's been some questions raised about, the slowdown in the wage taxes or other types of things that we'll use to do it. But I wanted to have a little bit of a conversation from your end about the importance of school funding to the city's overall economic health. I think I was just meeting with Dr. Height last week, and he talked about the fact that school enrollment is up on the district side, also reversing a long-time trajectory around declining enrollment at the school district. Charter school enrollment is also up. We know that city population has increased every year over the past decade, indicating that people want to stay here, and talking about the importance of having families feel like this is a viable place for them. We have talked a lot in our city about what happens when families leave us to go, move elsewhere, largely because of the value of the schools. And I know that when our schools are in financial freefall, our city's economic health and certainty is certainly not guaranteed, and in fact is potentially in danger. So, there's been a lot of talk about this, but could you talk a little bit about the importance of the schools and why you see them as being this investment as being essential to the city's fiscal health overall?
Right. So I know you saw that there was a survey of area businesses the Chamber did within the last year, and they were asked what the biggest challenge was, and it was talent pipeline. And there's really no better way for us to develop that talent pipeline than to invest in our schools and make sure that when our kids graduate from high school, they're ready for whatever that next step may be for them. So in terms of our economic development, there really is nothing more important we can do than to educate our kids.
Yeah. And while I know that the amount of money that we're raising may seem significant, I think it's also important to note that we are merely ensuring that our schools won't face dramatic and uncertain deficits. It's not a guarantee of full funding adequacy, which is where we believe the state must come in.
That's right.
Correct?
Yep. One of the things that we've said is that what we're trying to do is get the district to financial stability so that it's not spending each year wondering kind of whether it can make it through the next year because it's unserved, its finances, but we're not getting to adequacy. And instead, that is the state's responsibility.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you, because I know that I sent my kids to schools where every year there was just massive budget cut after cut after cut, and it was just simply unsustainable to not be able to have counselors, to not have nurses, to have class sizes go on the rise, to see the lack of security and, people basically being told that we just don't know what the future holds for us. Whereas I think the message right now is dramatically different. The message right now is we're starting to make the investments. I think that we're seeing the difference it makes when families begin to stay, and of course the school district's enrollment going up, and families overall, both through school district enrollment and charter school enrollment, seeing those things increase is a significant investment in our city, as well as via the public school system that we're using to attract them and keep people here. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the recent CAFR report that was released and talk a little bit about some things that have been discussed quite frequently in terms of revenues and that aren't part of the city's current proposal for revenue enhancement. One of them being the tax abatements and the KOZs. So I think the recent CAFR report indicated that the city forfeited $42.5 million in 2017 alone through the tax abatement program, and $119 million in 2017 alone through the KOZ program. I mean, there is no question that tax abatements and KOZs, when used, generate development, keep businesses going. I don't want to have that debate about whether they belong. I think my question has a lot to do about whether and in what ways the city is going to advise on common sense, sensible adjustments to the tax abatement program. It's been in place for 2 decades with almost no change. The city is dramatically different right now than when it was when it originally came into place. And, where you think that there's room for common sense adjustments to that program.
So we went through an RFP process, selected an outside expert to help us look at the abatement program and to see whether it made sense to make any modifications. They are scheduled to have that report finished by the end of this month so that we can use it in this discussion. We're also happy to work with council and talk about any ideas that you may have for how to adjust it and then to kind of run that through that analysis.
And will the analysis look through various scenarios about what can be done, whether capping it, limiting it geographically, adopting it to?
That's exactly what we'll look at different scenarios, yes.
Like maybe contributing. I think one of the things that we want to see is a little bit of the steady income coming in through the school district and the city by potentially taking a look at whether the abatement could be graduated in over the course of 10 years.
And we're happy to have specific discussion with you about what ideas you want us to look at, and then we'll try to include that in the
And will
study.
the study run numbers?
Yes.
Okay. And will it do an analysis of where the abatement dollars have been most heavily concentrated as well? Or is it mostly like what could be done?
It's more
to adapt it?
forward-looking, yes.
Okay. In terms of KOZs, I understand this is a state program. Again, the state has modified it to some extent. But this is another area where the city has forfeited about $119 million in 2017. And are we giving any kinds of guidelines or standards for the KOZ program as it moves forward, as we apply to the state for additional KOZs? One of the reasons why is because I think what came up last year when the city was making applications is that a number of entities have come forward to say that they can't compete against KOZs in highly developed parts of our city. And it raises concerns about whether the KOZ, which was initially created to be like a Kickstarter in a struggling area, is now going to be used as like a competitive tool where we may see contiguous KOZ zones when that was never the original intent of it. So is the city offering any kinds of guidelines or perspectives on that?
Two things. One, just context around the number that we show in the CAFR is forfeited. That is kind of that assumes that the businesses would have come here even without the KOZ. So there's no kind of credit for offsetting revenues from businesses coming here that wouldn't have before. So I just want to give some context on that number. And I know there are state guidelines in KOZs kind of what businesses have to do. But on your broader question of kind of what context we've given, I'd really have to talk to Commerce and kind of get back to you, or have them address it when they come here.
Yeah. It's also not entirely clear whether the $119 million is movement of money from one business that may relocate. So we know, for example, of at least one business that relocated into the 30th Street building from another location. So they would have paid that money had they stayed in that former location. So I don't know whether the program has been adapted to ensure that any money any business that goes in is truly a brand new business, has brought in new employees, has hired new employees that did not previously come from other parts of the city.
And my understanding, and again, the Commerce would be better to answer, but from talking to them, is that as they look at businesses who would go into KOZs now, they're really focusing on new businesses and new jobs. But again, that's probably a better question for them.
I mean, one of the, and I'll end here, but I think part of the hope around it is to just, I do think the city does need guidelines about how we want to see an expansion of the KOZs. Like, what is the ideal thing? Because this is a significant program. It offers 10 years of, completely tax-free, including sales tax. It's like winning a lottery, and it should be used strategically. It should not be used as a blanket program that, again, is seen more as a perk than actually a significant business incentive.
Understood.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Councilman Green?
Mr. Chair. Good morning, Mr. DeVoe. Wanted
Morning.
to follow up on some of the questions that the Council President asked in reference to the request for funding. So the school district, did they make the request of the $980 million to the administration? Or was that the administration making analysis of the funds that they needed?
It was, they told us they had a $906 million gap. We put
906 deficit, right?
906, yeah.
Right.
And we put together a funding proposal.
Which was initially 980.
Correct.
Okay, and now their deficit is now 660?
After building in the assessment increases, that's right.
Right, and now and so as a result of that, the administration made an analysis to make a request of 960.
Yeah, that the 966 that we were talking about includes those assessment increases, the $192 million. So if you take that out, our request is like 770-ish.
So the request 770?
Yeah, the equivalent, if you're using the 660 deficit, that already assumes the increase in assessments.
Mhm.
So then, yeah, our request on top of that is about 770.
But the total request is still like 960.
Yes.
Right, okay. So I guess what I'm trying to understand is that if the deficit is gone from 905 to 660, how is the funding request only going from 980
So
to 960?
that's what I was trying to say. So the 966 includes the 192 in increase in assessed value.
Right.
The school district has assumed that 192 to get to a deficit of 660.
Okay.
So our request then, coming apples to apples, you take that 192 off the 966, and then you get to 770.
Okay, all right, thank you. That clears up some questions I had from previous conversations. But as a follow-up to that question in reference to this additional funding request, I'm looking at page 7 of your budget detail. And so in looking at page 7, it looks like you, for the Finance Department, had budgeted for FY19 123 positions, whereas in the FY18 budget, there was budgeted of 118 positions,
Right.
but an actual of 107. So that's an increase of positions. And if you take that increase of positions and you factor that with departments across the city, I think primarily in the police department, that's an increase of dollars that we're asking for new positions.
So the change from 118 to 123 is actually a move of people working on the One Philly project from capital to operating. So it's not new to the government, it's just changing the funding source.
Okay, but we are making an investment in new positions in this FY19 budget, correct?
We're changing the funding source. So
Right now, that's for this perspective, yes. You're
Yeah.
going from capital to your
Oh,
department.
citywide?
Oh, citywide, correct.
yes, we are.
Right, and what's that total net amount again?
Um, Give me 1 second.
As you're looking, I guess the
Yeah.
question I'm asking is that even though with the additional assessment dollars and we've reduced the amount of requests to the 770, you're still asking for a tax increase on the citizens. And the question is and although this is a shift from capital to finance, or other departments we're putting more dollars into the budget in reference to new positions, both for salary and fringe, does that make sense? And I understand we need to make investments, but at the same point, we're hearing from our constituents who are really concerned about another tax increase. Does it make sense to be expanding the city workforce when at the same time we're asking for additional dollars?
Understood. Yeah, so the prime areas where staffing increasing, big increases in public safety. Police, it's not actually an increase over the prior year's budget. It's to provide them funding to get to their budgeted level, which we think is important. Fire, big increases in fire staffing, kind of in both places, in part replenishing what was lost during the fiscal crisis. Some increases in streets. So we think actually every place where we are adding staffing is really important.
Right.
And we kind of thought, long and hard about any additional investment we made.
And I totally support the need for additional investment in those positions, but at the same point, we know that there's a crisis. You talked about a crisis before. We have a crisis in revenue funding for the school district. Does it make sense to make those additional investments at the same time we're trying to address the school district crisis of funding?
We think it does. I mean, there are always trade-offs, and in our mind, it was worth making those crucial investments. We did also increase the city's contribution to the school district by $20 million a year, using savings from the budget. Our conclusion was that it made sense to also staff up, particularly in public safety.
Right, but if you're running an organization and you have less revenue, you typically don't hire more staff, even though you have a need to hire more staff and you would like to make that investment. But shouldn't it make sense if we're trying to deal with these issues, address the school district initiative in a way that's not putting additional burden on our citizens?
So we thought it did make sense because we thought there were investments that were important to public safety, and we didn't think that should wait. But as you're saying, it's a policy call.
Okay. A couple other questions. On page 17 of the budget detail, I showed that there was a expenditure to the African American Museum, went from $120,000 to now $60,000 for FY19. Can you explain that change?
Yeah, I think there was additional money put in at the end of the budget process last year, and typically we treat those kind of additions as one time.
Okay.
And so that's what we did with that.
On page 16, I see $75,000 allocated for a to-be-determined legislative initiative / financial analysis. Could you provide some background on that?
Yeah, so every year during the year, there are requests for analysis that come up. For example, doing the abatement study that we're doing now that we may not have anticipated at the beginning of the year. So we like to put a line in our budget to give us the flexibility to do those kind of studies during the year.
And those are studies that primarily come from the administration, or those studies that may be requested from this legislative body?
So
Or a combination?
they have been both in the past.
Okay. So ideas like public banking or other type of initiatives, that could be a source.
Yes.
Okay. Also, and I talked about this 2 weeks ago in reference to the omnibus appropriation bill that was passed in D.C.
Sorry, I didn't hear the.
Okay, I talked about this 2 weeks ago when the Congress and the President signed an omnibus appropriation bill into law. There was additional funding that went into that appropriation bill. We had some conversation about the reserve, both the labor reserve and I call it the Federal Reserve, for lack of better words.
Yes.
But there were additional investments made in that budget that will impact the city. For example, community development block grant dollars, which originally was supposed to be zeroed out, was actually increased from $3.1 billion to $3.3 billion. Has there been any conversations, discussions, either locally or with those in either D.C. or in Harrisburg about how we may adjust the 5-year plan based on how that budget was passed and those additional dollars now being available?
I mean, how we would adjust what we're planning to do with CDBG
Just
funds?
for future planning, just other initiatives, trying to make sure that the city is, to the extent if there are additional dollars available, making sure that we are having an opportunity to take advantage of those dollars. Has there been any type of strategic conversations in that regard?
I think planning and development probably is having those conversations. I haven't been involved with them, but I think when they come here, they'll be able to talk to you about that.
Okay. Earlier, there was a conversation, I think Councilman Dom asked about the DC 47 contract. My understanding is probably also a question for the pension fund. Is the administration's proposal to have the pension fund fully funded in 13 years?
Correct.
And that's incumbent upon both the DC 47 and fire contracts being addressed, as well as the rate of return staying as it is in our current market?
Yes, but we adjusted last week pension board meeting. We adjusted the assumed rate of return So it will go over the next couple of years from the current 7.7 to 7.65 and 7.6. But that's all. So the assumption, the 2031 projection was based on the 7.7%. We'll get new analyses from the actuary on the lower assumptions, but I think we'll still get to the
The bell is rung, so I
100%.
just have one last question. From, I think, your testimony, and also looking at the mayor's budget address and the budget proposals to provide additional dollars for the school district, a lot of that is also incumbent on trying to give people some relief based on a homestead exemption. And
Correct.
my understanding is that about 30% of eligible homeowners have not applied for a homestead exemption. Since we last talked, has there been any plans, discussions to do any type of major initiative to inform citizens, especially those who currently are not getting a homestead exemption, even at $30,000, how they can apply for that and getting information out about that program?
Yes, the Revenue Department has put together an outreach program that includes kind of a variety of different types of outreach, social media, going door to door, standard advertising. So they have a plan,
And when will that go into effect?
I think they'll probably start on it pretty much right away. They'll start working on that.
Okay, right away, is that tomorrow? Is that next week? Is that
I think they've.
June 1? July
No,
1?
I think they'll be putting it together. They'll be reaching out during this fiscal year.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the
Okay.
latitude.
Thank you, Councilman. Rob, real quickly, you mentioned, I think in the first question Councilman Green had about the difference, the 908 to the 660. Now, all that difference at 248, if our math is right here, it's not all real estate, right?
No,
Part of
there's
that,
U-
it's
there's UNO,
UNO, right?
correct.
Is it 190 versus 58?
I think that's about right. We want to
Okay.
just check that with the district, but that.
Okay. Well, that's what Mr. Stitt told me, and since we're not letting him go to prison, we're going to, make sure he's right here, so. Okay, but I appreciate that. Thank you. Councilwoman Bass.
Thank you. Good morning.
Morning.
How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm well. So I just had a couple of questions for you, and back to the school district. So one of your goals that you listed in your testimony was school district funding, that the finance department was going to work with the administration and council and to secure an appropriate level of funding. And, I've been asking this question from various folks in the administration in terms of what is appropriate and what is stabilizing. I think that there are varying definitions. And so, we obviously want our schools to be well-funded. We want to support our schools. We want to make investments in our schools. And I do think that putting money in is a good thing. I do have some concern, though, that we're really not looking at the overall picture of the district and about the gap that we know is going to continue to exist because we're not getting the support we need out of Harrisburg and we're not getting the charter school reimbursements. And so can you talk a little bit about that and, how are we at this point, and raising taxes is a significant undertaking. I think that people, the citizens of Philadelphia, really don't mind if they know that their tax dollars are going to a well-supported school system. Mm-hmm. But I think if we're talking about basically, we're just keeping the lights on and we're just making sure that there's not a deficit, but we're really not advancing. We're really not giving our kids everything that they deserve. So I'm wondering if you can possibly address that
Sure.
In your role, because I know that that's, something that you listed very early on as part of one of your priorities.
Right.
And,
And I understand the concern. I think it's a
Sure.
legitimate concern. And the level of funding that we're putting in is more than just keeping the lights on. I mean, it's to make sure that the things like the cuts to counselors and nurses that happened before don't have to happen again, and to make sure that the progress that the district has been making in things, like reading by third grade and graduation rates, that those continue and that they can build on those. And that's what we think stabilization gets them. It's not, you talked about everything our kids need. It's not that level of funding, the adequacy level. And we do need the state's help for that. But we think it's really important to make sure that the district has stability and can continue to build on the success that it's had. So that's why we think this funding is kind of crucial.
I guess one of the concerns I have is that we're putting money in, and of course our kids need counselors. I mean, taking the counselors and the nurses out of school was just horrendous. I remember meeting with a school principal who had to interrupt our meeting and go give a child asthma treatment, and I just thought, oh my God, if something happens. And just as a parent, I just think if something happens to that child, and, here the principal is, who's not a medical professional, but who's doing the best that they could. But anyway, that's a whole different subject. But so I say all that to say that, it's a good thing to, be able to provide that basic level of stability. But my concern again is that when you compare us to what, say, an Abington Township is spending per school, or Cheltenham Township, or Radnor, or Lower Merion, any of the school districts that are bordering the city of Philadelphia, when you look at what they're spending versus what we're spending per pupil, it pales in comparison. And so what I really want to see is how do we get to that point? Is there a strategy for that really is going to advance us in a significant way? Because I don't see the funds that we are putting in as having that kind of profound effect on our district.
Right. And that would require additional state funding. I mean, that's what you're talking about.
Correct.
And looking at the, the
It would
charter.
require state funding. It would require those charter school reimbursements that we desperately
Correct.
need.
Yes.
So,
Yep. I think we're agreeing with each other.
okay, but I'm asking you, how do we get there?
Well, it's
As part of your plan, as part
Right,
of, because you said your mission was to, help with the district as, the director of finance to make
Right.
sure that we get more for our school district. How do we do that?
right. And that's really a long-term Harrisburg strategy, making sure that the state does what it's supposed to be. But in the meantime, I think we can't wait on that. We do have to do what we can do locally, now.
I agree with you. I think we have to do what we can do locally, but I also think that at the same time, while we're doing what we're doing locally, that people want to see a strategy for what's the game plan. I don't mind chipping in on making sure that this is going to happen and it's going to be right, and our kids are going to benefit immediately from having nurses and counselors and all those sorts of things. But what is the long-range game plan to make sure that, our kids are going to be addressed in a way or educated in a way that's appropriate? The other question I had for you was around the fund balance. I was wondering if you could just talk again about long-term, the plans to improve the fund balance long-term.
Yeah. And our long-term goal there is to get to between 6 and 8% of revenues. We're got to about 4% last year. We actually will dip down a little over the next couple of years before bouncing back up at the end of the plan.
So we're at about 4% now?
We were at the end of last year.
Okay, so where are we now?
But we'll get below that over the next couple of years. Fund balance is going to go down a little. And then towards the end of the plan, it starts to build up. I think that's another priority that's really long-term, that it's going to take a while to get there. And it involves, growing the tax base, making sure we have, stronger revenues, and, limiting expenditures where we can.
Can you provide to us something in writing in terms of what the plan is to address the fund balance?
Sure.
That would be great. Another quick question. Just looking at, from your summary that was provided, the contract summary under professional services, and, if we just look at the amount that, and I'm just going to skip ahead to fiscal year 17, the total amount of contracts was $15,103,000, blah, blah, blah. And the total amount to minority women and disabled-owned businesses was $4 million, which was about 31% participation rate through the finance department. And then if you drop down to the next box, it says the total minority women and disabled-owned business contract participation goals, which include public works, services, supplies, and equipment, and professional services combined. For fiscal year 17, that was 35% in total. So can you give us a breakdown as to what that is?
A lot of it's broken down on the contracting experience page that shows our major contracts, which is, I guess, page 10. And it shows the participation rates for the largest contracts, which really does show the bulk of our contracting.
Oh, so this is it here?
Yeah.
What? Okay. Okay, let me review that and I'll come back to that.
Okay.
Okay, and one last question for you. I wanted to talk about the demographics in terms and the salary differences, which really just struck me, just dead on in terms of the amount or the salaries within your department between the gaps between minority and white employees and also women as well. And so I noticed that on page 3 of your summary, the average salary for full-time staff among minorities was about $56,000, and among Caucasians it was around $83,700. And those numbers are really jarring. And when you look further back into your report, your summary, on page 11 under employee data, just looking at those numbers again in terms of females of color, males of color, it's really just very jarring in terms of what these numbers are. And I'm wondering if you can give us some level of explanation, because I'm assuming that you're verifying that these numbers are accurate, correct?
Yeah, and
Okay.
and we agree. I think part of the issue for us is we don't really hire that many people in a year, so we don't have that much opportunity to move these numbers. So if you look at page 5, for example, and you see our new hires for half a year, there were only 6. And, of those, 3 were black or African American, 2 were Asian, one was white. So that one helps our overall numbers, but it's not going to move the needle quickly. It's something that will take time to move, and I think that's kind of our constraint, is that we don't hire that many people, so it's hard to move these numbers dramatically in a year.
I understand that there's not a lot of hiring out of the finance department like some other departments, but I still think that these numbers are completely unacceptable. And for whatever hires that we do offer, they have to be much more reflective of the demographics of the city. And, these numbers, when you look at, I'm just comparing African-American females, the median salary at $43,540 compared to Caucasian females. There's about a $20,000 difference there compared to Hispanic females. Again, about a little more than $20,000 difference there. Asian women in that category, that number is significant and well represented. But when you look at all of the other categories, these numbers are just really, really bad. And this is my opinion. And I don't think that they're reflective of the city of Philadelphia. And I do think that when we do hire, we have to do better. I think that has to be a part of the finance department's, just a part of your goal. And also, do you have
Can I just answer? I agree with that, and I think that's why you see when you actually look at our hiring for the last 6 months.
I see.
That, it's something we're working on.
What were the salaries of those who were hired? Can you give us that?
We can get
That would be great. And is there a residency requirement with all of your employees as
Yes.
well? Okay, all right, great. Okay, I'll come back around. I know the
Okay.
bell's rung. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Councilwoman Sanchez.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Couple of points. I was listening downstairs. In the abatement review report or analysis that you're requesting, is there a timeline for that when we will see it?
Yes, end of this month.
At the end of this month, the report will be done, or your contract?
It'll be done.
Okay. And I think Councilwoman Gim asked a little bit about this. How can we impact the review of what they're doing, or can you send us what you asked to be reviewed in case there's some data sets that we'd like to see in there?
Yeah, and we're happy to set up a meeting, and whoever wants to come
I
talk
just
to
want
us.
to see what went out. What were the data set requests, and in case we have anything that we would like additionally
Okay.
analyze, particularly in different geographic
Yep.
areas. Okay. I want to talk a little bit about, and I know you heard me last week talk a little bit about what I assumed to be our performance-based budgeting versus what we have. And I first want to acknowledge that your performance standards were much clearer and had some measurable goals than the ones that I've seen so far. But again, we haven't gotten all of the binder information, so I don't know what's forthcoming. But one is, how involved were you in that, and what were the challenges to us getting to what we discussed versus what we have? Thank you.
So I think the biggest challenge is any performance measurement program is getting to data that is accurate, reliable, comparable, and and repeatable, and matching that up with what you think is important and how you want to judge your organization. That's really the big challenge.
So do you think this is adequate, what we've been given so far? I mean, I think it's unfair for us to say we're doing performance-based budgeting because that's not what we're doing. I understand it's difficult.
Yeah, and I think in a new process like this evolves over time, and you'll see it kind of continuously improving. I don't think that means we don't have it or that we haven't made really good progress. And there's always going to be room to make it better.
Do you think we need to bring in someone to help us develop this with the different departments? Again, I haven't seen the rest of the departments. I've just seen kind of the mayor's office and this one. But, not having, so for instance, there's no financial goals, efficiencies, reinvestments in any of the stuff we're doing. And that's the crust of it, right? So if we need more time, right, because it has to evolve, I'd like for us to take that. But this is not what we reviewed when we talked to council about what was forthcoming. And so I think it's unfair to say we're doing performance-based budgeting if, in fact, the financial tool component of it is going to be missing.
Yeah, and again, I don't think it's going to be missing. I just think it's an evolving process. I mean, we're only, 2 years into it, so it is still relatively new for us.
So how do we measure progress if the simplicity of the goals is when you return a phone call, and in fairness,
I don't think ours are like that.
No, and that's what I was about to say.
Yeah.
In fairness, I think you talk about some overarching goals that we all agree to, that you're trying to get to some benchmarks. But again, none of this gives me what is the financial efficiencies, and then even if you invest the entire efficiencies back to improvement, it's not there, right?
So you're asking about kind of specific efficiency measures as
I'm
opposed
saying
to kind of outcome measures.
When this tool has been used by other municipalities, it is based on government efficiencies, dollar amount savings, and the ability for government to reinvest in its priorities. That is not what we have. And so if that's not the goal, and we're modifying that to, again, because this discussion goes back, the difference between what initially was discussed around zero-based budgeting versus this performance, you guys articulated a different strategy. You wanted to do a combination of things, but it was always based on the premise of we were going to have a more efficient government, we were going to be able to reinvest in priorities, and it would be a transparent process.
Right, and so what this does show us is when you look in the budget detail, you'll see that it will show what we're spending for a program, and it will show what the outcomes are based on that spending. And that will allow us to measure how well a program is doing. And that will allow us then to make investment decisions. Right. So I think it does do kind of in an overarching sense what you're talking about.
Yes, so because yours is the most thorough that I've seen so far, why can't we put an efficiency goal attached to that?
We can definitely talk about adding an efficiency goal.
I mean, so far, again, I haven't seen all of them because we don't have our budget data stuff, but if yours being the most thought out, if we're going to use this as a framework for the rest of the departments, I think having that efficiency goal is hugely important. All of these goals need to be tied into the ability to have conform contracts, and all of these things is going to save us this amount of money that allows us to reinvest here. I think it's a worthwhile to try to get that done so that we can get other departments to look at this. I'm just concerned that without someone really, either the goal is efficiency and reinvestment or it isn't.
Right.
I guess that's what
And I
wanna
think
know.
you'll see as you go through that we're not an outlier. There are a lot of departments with well thought out
Okay.
measures, and that will allow us to make investment decisions based on what we're getting for our investment.
Okay, but you'll agree with me that efficiency and reinvestment in priority should be the
Definitely
goal.
something we'll look at, yes.
Okay, so I look forward to seeing this kind of documentation evolve. One of the things that concerns me, and I want to know what the finance department is doing as it relates. You know, Pew puts out a report. We have all these tax credit stuff. It's not utilized. Who's overseeing our ability to bring efficiencies to that component of what we're doing in terms of some of that program?
Yeah, so Commerce and Revenue are working on a study of our incentives. It actually grows out of legislation from Councilman Dom. So we're looking overall at tax incentives and how to manage that better.
So what's the goal for us being able to kind of do this assessment? And again, I say this at a time because we are asking taxpayers to pay additional revenues. We have a robust program of tax incentives. We have a report that says people don't utilize them. And I want to know what are the man-made barriers to that, right?
Right.
And how do we ensure people that we are being good stewards when we make choices about who we give a tax break to in a climate where we're asking people to pay more?
Yeah, and I mean, I think the key thing it's looking at is, when we give these credits, what are we getting in return? Are people taking advantage of them? Are they creating jobs? Are the jobs creating tax revenue? I think that's the kind of thing they're looking at in that study.
So, also the application of it. I mean, I think one of the things we worked on B Corp legislation, one of the things we found as we modified the initial program established by then Councilman Kenny was, people had to apply, then go through a year, then resubmit. I mean, are we going to look at the systems related to that?
Yeah, and one of the other things that we've done, we have the Fair Chance Hiring program, which kind of converted or is an attempt to convert a credit into a grant, because in the long run, grant programs may make a lot more sense that are administered out of commerce rather than out of revenue, so that they're economic development tools and that we can set criteria for when we give grants and have clawbacks. And I think that's probably the long-term way that we should go.
Okay. And then lastly, I know that there was a discussion, you submitted new financial data to PICA. Are the new numbers there around use and occupancy adjustments?
No, the numbers that we submitted to PICA, we had 2 arbitration awards within the last month, one for sheriffs and one for correctional officers. And when we have new labor agreements or awards, we have to submit a new plan to PICA. The last plan that they approved was the 18 to 22 plan. So we actually had to give them an update against the 18 to 22 plan for the city's numbers.
Do we have a better idea when we'll have the updated use and occupancy numbers
So
based on the new assessment?
yeah, so we've been doing, we want to just double check with the district, but we think that they're in the kind of the 45-ish range, but we just want to confirm that.
45 million?
Yeah, over 5 years.
Over 5 years. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Councilman Dom?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
A couple questions. The fees that we've talked about in prior years, have we done an analysis on all of our fees that we charge in government to make sure they're up to date and current?
We have, and we are this close to having a report that we can share with you on that.
Okay, great. Because I know we had last week, I think it was, CLIP was in, and we talked about raising their fees. They said they hadn't been raised for 6 years. So
Who said that, sorry?
I think it was Tommy Conway.
Oh, okay.
So you might want to look at that.
Yeah.
And also just to comment, this body last May or June, I think, as you alluded to, Rob, passed a bill requiring, I guess, the administration to review all incentives, tax abatements, KOZs, everything. And I think every year we'll look at 7 of the programs of the 20 or so. And I know this year it's tax abatement.
Right.
But I guess.
And there's an incentive study we're doing too,
Incentives.
and I think one of your staff is helping with that.
Right, that's right. But I guess until we have that result, we should probably hold off having a conversation until we see those results.
Makes sense.
On the question of fund balances, because I know this was a hot topic when the beverage tax was passed, and we're talking about fund balances constantly. Is it still the 2 or 3 most important reasons for us to have a good bond rating, fund balances, and pension liability?
Yeah, and pension liability kind of as a subset of fixed costs. But what they want to understand is flexibility and your ability to react when things go wrong. So fund balance and fixed costs are, huge issues.
Right. And what is our fund balance today?
So it's a year-end number, and we ended last year a little over 180, and we're projecting that we'd end this year around the same, and that next year we'd go to about 120 something.
So isn't our fund balance in the last 2 years much higher than it was 2 years ago?
It's higher than it had been. It's lower than our internal guideline and much lower than where the GFOA says we should be. GFOA suggests you should be at the equivalent of 2 months of revenue, which would be about 17%, and we were around 4%.
I guess what I can't figure out is that 2 years ago, our fund balance was lower. We didn't have a plan that you've initiated on funding the pension. And now we have that plan and we have higher fund balances. I don't understand why they downgraded us recently.
We asked that question too. I think, to be fair to them, I think they would have wanted to see more progress in each area. And they probably look at us compared to other jurisdictions where our fund balance is still low compared to them. But you're right, we have made progress in both areas since we were put on negative watch.
Is there a report that you could share with this body from the people who downgraded us?
Yes.
That would show us what we need to do to improve our bond rating and what areas we need to focus on?
Yes, I think they have a section that says strengths and weaknesses, and
Right.
so we can. Yeah,
Just so we're focused on that so we can move towards that. Let me ask a question on this, the latest, the mayor's address for the tax increases.
Mm-hmm.
As I understand it, the assessments on average are going up 11%.
Roughly, yes.
And right now, we're at a potential of 4% or 4.1% increase in real estate taxes.
That's right.
And of course, you might not know this because I haven't made it that clear, but I am in favor of cutting some of our overhead versus we have increase in real estate taxes.
Well, why didn't you mention that before?
So if we can look at that, it would be a good route.
And we did we've talked about this, we did during our budget process, and that's part of the reason we're able to do 20 million additional a year in contributions,
Right.
is because we looked at our own budget first.
I mean, I think with the homestead, I mean, I understand how you're trying to make the numbers more comfortable for people, but I think when people hear 11% increase in assessment and a 4% increase in real estate taxes, it's like a 1-2 punch. Even though for some people those dollars are small, it's the marketing and the concept that's out there. And by the way, people that have more expensive properties, those dollars are big. And that leads me to CAMA. I know
And that, by the way, is exactly, as you said, why we wanted to increase the homestead, to help people
Right.
kind of deal with the increased values and what that means for their taxes.
Right. I guess what I'm saying, though, is that instead of having the real estate increase, let's try to figure out what we can do internally to save money in certain areas, whether it's tax collection or the prisons, to lower it or try to eliminate it.
And that is what we did, and that's why we increased the contribution.
And so the other question I have, though, is CAMA.
Yes.
I know we talked about CAMA originally being 18, now it's going to be 19. Once CAMA is in place, would the residents of the city expect to receive a notice every year on their assessment?
So every year when there's a change in their assessment, but they should be expecting that already, because we're already going to doing annual assessments, and any property where there's a change would get a new notice.
But isn't the problem, can I ask one last question? Isn't the problem right now is that we haven't had these assessments changed for many properties for the last few years, so it's like an accumulation of, and that's why it's 11%. Because I don't think real estate in Philadelphia went up 11% in the last year.
Yeah, so, and I think that's why we want to make sure that we do them every year so that it's more predictable.
So I guess my point simply is, once CAM is in place, we're going to avoid these bigger jumps in assessments.
So we're going to start doing annual now. So the impact of having annual assessments will already be felt, and then what will happen with assessments will just be driven by the market.
Right. I guess the point is, if we had made annual assessments of 1 or 2% a year, people would understand that towards the rate of inflation versus this accumulation of
Yep,
11.
I understand, and it'll just be driven by the market at that point. So,
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilwoman Gim?
Yes, thank you very much. For clarity, I'm following up with my council colleague's question. With the increase in the homestead, it was my understanding that any property valued at less than $400,000 will actually see a tax decrease, property tax decrease.
Yes,
Is
if
that
their
correct?
assessment didn't change.
Right, okay. And so what percentage of residences and homes would that be?
So I can get that back to you on that. The median value is 128.1, so obviously it's a fairly high percent,
So the
or below 400.
The majority of people will likely see a tax decrease
If their assessment doesn't
as long as their
change.
assessment hasn't
Yes.
changed, right? And assessments are just going to be a routine aspect, I think, as my council colleague, what we believe to be an assessment of property should be a routine and annual aspect of
Yes, that's right.
being here. But, so again, understanding that the increase in the homestead means any property valued at less than $400,000 will see a decrease, and that would significantly encompass a majority of the properties and residences here.
Yeah, and one of the big reasons that we wanted to increase the homestead was to offset the impact of the increase in values.
Why don't you make that more clear? I mean, I think in part it's not about offsetting, it's that a majority of the properties will not see a property tax impact as a result of this funding for schools.
Yeah, we say it a lot. I don't know how to make it more clear, but we do say
Maybe
it.
lead with it. I mean, in fact, I think it's saying that we are raising property taxes on home values above $400,000. Is that right?
Unless their assessment
Assessments,
changes. Yeah.
right, but we are talking about the property tax increase. I want to separate out property tax increase from assessments. Assessments, we have agreed, should be an annual routine part of how property is valued in our city and should be an important aspect of understanding a predictable growth around and incremental growth around things. We don't want to see the AVI. We don't want to see things, kind of languish for years and years without being assessed. And I think the city, as you said, is moving towards this manually currently, right? Every
That's
year
correct. Yep.
manually. And hopefully with the implementation of CAMA, automatically or digitally, however we want to phrase it.
Right.
But why not just say that properties over $400,000 are the ones that are going to be hit with a 4% tax increase?
Well, we have said
Property tax
we have
increase.
said that, but actually your increase, if you didn't have a change in assessment, would be below 4% at 400,000. It actually kind of incrementally grows up. It goes up, but we have said that. We've said it repeatedly.
I don't think it's presented that way. I mean, I just think it would be helpful and clear, and also understanding what percentage of residences actually make that happen, because I agree with my colleagues that hearing the property tax increase makes people feel a little bit wary. But when we hear that property taxes are going up primarily on houses valued at $400,000 or more, it helps understand that this is, the city is trying to work on some kind of responsible taxation, and keeping in mind that assessments are a routine aspect of property value assessments of the process. So the other question I had was that Scott Petrie, who's the head of the Parking Authority, had a op-ed in the Philadelphia Inquirer just recently talking a little bit about the amount of money going towards between the city and the school district, and made an interesting argument that it's actually the city that is taking money from the schools as opposed to due to a fairly obscure formula that a lot of people, is encoded in state law, but is relatively obscure to the majority of people. So I thought that was an interesting argument, in part because, we have had a lot of questions about the parking authority, including increases in 2015 around increases in employees. For example, since 2015, there have been 90 new full-time positions, 10 new staff members making over 100,000. There was 1 ED. We have 3 head executives between Tolson, Petrie, and Thompson, I think. 49% increase in the part-time jobs and 13 new hires at their last board meeting. So is it your understanding that division between 40 million, for example, they're arguing that for FY18, 40 million will go, or FY17, I'm not really clear, or FY18 rather, 40 million will go to the city this year, 10 million will go to the schools. If the profits from the parking authority were to dramatically increase, would that proportion be the same? So for example, if it went, instead of 50 million at 40-10, if there was 100 million in profits, would it be 80-20?
It would not. So under that state formula that you're talking about, there's a cap up to which the city gets money, and then above that it goes to the school district. So in your scenario, everything above that 40 million would
actually go to the school district. Right. So I think that's part of, some clarity, just because it went out into the papers as that argument. And I think the parking authority may make a decent argument around the Uber money, but it's your understanding that the Uber money is currently divided as a proportion between 2/3, 1/3. Is that correct?
I think that's correct.
Okay. And that it's not clear to me, though, whether the 1/3 is actually based on need to oversight as opposed to just a division of the money. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'm not sure either.
And how have the quarterly meetings, or how have the regular meetings between yourself, the parking authority, and the school district been going? You meet all 3 as a group.
We are, all 3 of us meet every other month, and we go through the latest financial reports from the parking authority.
And have those been effective, or are they helping, do you give a chance to weigh in on some of the expenses or give some feedback?
Mostly we ask questions about how they got to their numbers, and they'll explain it. It's not like we're not giving them suggestions on how to manage. We're really just kind of trying to understand their numbers.
And do you think it would be helpful is there a mechanism for you to give feedback on their numbers?
We give them feedback, but we don't kind of talk about their management. It might be helpful to do that. I understand your point. And
do you get clarity on sort of employee hires and other types of things about expenses?
Yeah, usually, yes. Yeah.
So you have all the numbers in terms of salaries and other types of things?
We have total number of hires. We don't have salary information.
Okay.
All right. Councilwoman, okay, thank you. Rob, just on one thing, and follow up with the Councilwoman's question. On this 400,000 figure, it's talked about like that's like a solid absolute figure. I mean, isn't that a little bit misleading? I mean, do we really know that at this point? I mean, people are getting their assessments raised,
So again, there are people in, 4 different buckets. I think there are some people actually seeing decreases, some people who aren't seeing changes. Right. But the 400,000 is just if there's no change.
Yeah, no change, but
right.
Again, that's why I guess,
isn't
that a little bit misleading? Because I don't want people, I guess we don't want people thinking, 400,000 is a dead set figure, you know what I'm saying?
I understand, yep. And that's what I was saying before in response to the council president's question, that what we looked at is if you're at the median, the 128.1, what's the break-even percentage increase in your assessment, and it's 8.7.
Mm-hmm. Okay, all right. It's just that the 400 thrown out there so much, I think people might not understand it, depending on their situation, really.
Right.
Yeah. Just one question. Councilman Jones was next. I just wanted to throw his question in because he had to leave. The $53 million, I think there's in there for the reserve. I think you call it Federal Reserve.
Yes.
Yeah. That's to guard against what our friends in the feds and the state might do, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Is there any more specific idea on that, or is it just kind of reactive, I guess, is the best way to
It's
say it.
reactive, and when we get a substantial amount of money from the federal government,
Right.
and there seem to be kind of constant threats and constant new ideas about how to stop us from getting some of that.
They're very
money.
creative in that, I see.
Yes. So we thought it was really prudent to have a reserve
Sure.
against that.
So just,
Yeah.
let's see what happens and
Yes.
hope for the best kind of stuff. Right?
Exactly.
Okay. Actually, Councilman Taubenberger hasn't had a chance yet. Councilman?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Following up on Councilwoman Gim's question with the PPA, referring to the same op-ed, it had stated that it is really 40% is returned as far as profit back to either the city, school district, federal government in the sense of Independence Hall. Do you find that figure to be correct? Have you read that op-ed?
I read it. I didn't kind of check it for accuracy, but I did read that in terms of, their percent of expenses and what goes back. So I don't know whether that 40% is accurate or not.
Okay, well, I think,
It'd be easy enough to check.
I think you ought to, because you do meet with them on a regular basis. And if that is correct, if it is correct, the 40%, would that be a rather decent return on investment?
Really kind of, I don't want to say that because I would have to kind of compare what it looks like compared to other parking authorities and what kind of comes back from there, and we can do that analysis if that would be helpful.
Okay, well, I think it would be helpful so we know where we stand
Yeah,
with
okay.
the whole thing. Thank you very much.
Sure.
Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilwoman Sanchez.
Thank you. Just for the record, as you work on the use and occupancy, if you could forward to our offices what it would take to generate 10 million, 20 million, and 30 million with the new assessments, and then
An additional
additional revenue.
annually?
Yes. And that's based on your request that you want to see us increase $20 million a year from our general fund.
We have increased it by 20 million. So,
Right, mhm.
so there's, that 20 million is already in the 5-year plan.
Right. So, but you're saying part of the proposal was for $20 million in
Part-
additional.
That's already, that's shown in our 19 to 20, so that's
Okay.
funded within our plan.
Oh, it's funded in your
Yes.
plan? Okay. So if you can get me that, and it would be interesting to see, last time I worked on use and occupancy around the exemption, there was about 17,000 payers. Has that number changed drastically?
I'd have to get
Okay.
back to you.
Yeah, if you can give us the methodology, because I know when we were coming up with the $2,500 exemption, it was based on 143,000 value, whatever. But we'd like to get that as soon as we can, just to review those numbers.
Okay.
I want to go back a little bit to bless you, to the fiscal guidance provided by the finance office
Bless you.
to the different departments. Last week, we talked a little bit around the capital fund management, and in our 5-year capital plan, carryover balances going down, coming from 2004. What, if anything, has been the financial guidance offered by your office about how do we break this down with these carryover and incomplete projects before we go into borrowing?
Yeah, so a couple of things. First of all, we really look at the carry forward amount in deciding what we're going to ask for in appropriations. So the larger the carry forward, the less likely we are to ask for new funding.
Why are we carrying stuff from 10 years, 20 years ago? I mean, at what point do we not close that out, particularly if they're project-based?
Yeah, so we have also, one of the things we've done over the last couple of years is start to close some of those out. And we did close a fair amount out, and we go back to departments and say...
I think that's an important performance measurement for departments. Going into our 5-year plan, there's 20-year carry-on. I mean, we're borrowing money, we're paying carrying costs. And
Yeah, but we borrow based on cash, not on those appropriations.
No, I know that,
So
but
those don't drive our borrowings.
I know that, but why are departments allowed to continue if we have these carryover balances? I think it's a bad finance practice, right? That people are allowed to carry stuff on their books.
Yep.
And when we look at, again, we don't, because this money doesn't come through the general fund, whether it's our capital fund or our water fund, we're not monitoring this all the time.
The
And-
carry forward? Oh, yeah, we are.
No, I'm saying monitoring the projects. And let me go to my next point. One of the questions that I asked Commissioner Carroll was about what are the standards that we have around projects, soft cost, design, and others. And what he said to me is they monitor it, but they have no standards. If we're moving to performance-based budgeting, I think we need to get to a point where we can begin to articulate some goals and some standards as it relates to these costs, right? And I think that, again, he didn't have a timeline. This is very concerning to me. You know, I've been talking about capital management since I got elected.
Right.
10 years later, I was hoping that we'd be at a better place around how do we manage these funds. And I say this because even though we don't carry it in our general fund, it is part of our debt service, and it does add to the cost of the projects that we're doing. We have a 10-point-something billion dollar plan and no matrix by which to measure efficiencies in that world. So what's a realistic timeline for the finance department to articulate some fiscal guidance and standards, so as these departments come online for performance budgeting, that be like the standard?
Right. And we do have...
Not setting their standards, but at least
Right.
that should be a requirement.
We do have capital guidelines, so probably need to kind of look through those and see where they might need to be shored up and, what's missing from them, and we can do that during this process.
Okay. One last thing. My bell rang. Did the CAMA street level data disc go around to council folks?
It went to the council
I know, but it went
president's
online.
office. So
When, today?
yesterday, the disc from yesterday. Yeah.
Okay. So that's getting distributed?
I got to check with, I'll check with.
Okay. All right. My time is up. Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Councilman Dom?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Again, right? On the One Philly project, I know that's your favorite topic, one of your favorite topics.
I have many favorite topics.
I know we've spent over $18 million. I'm just wondering when we expect it to be completed.
At the end of this calendar year.
Really? End of
Yeah.
18?
Yes.
That's great. And any idea what the total cost will be?
So through Go Live, the cost should be about $40 million.
So that's not too bad. Our original estimate was 37.5.
Right. Yeah.
Based on all the things that went on, that's not bad. It's
Right.
And then the workers' compensation. In fiscal year 18, we paid out $61 million in medical and disability payments, and we're increasing that number to 68.3, over a $7 million increase. Have we had any efforts to reduce the severity number of injuries and taking measures to cut that number down?
Yeah, we spend a lot of time on safety and trying to cut the number down. What we really put in there is kind of a trend number, but that is what, focus. We have an office that is primarily focused on safety. And they send out
a big number.
Yeah, they send out report cards to departments and kind of break it up into proactive and reactive measures and grade departments on how they're doing.
I mean, we're increasing it more than 10%.
Yeah, and it's just the trend.
Okay, let me go back to something Councilwoman Sanchez I know is pretty focused on, and that is the process of budgeting. And I have, is it possible for the administration to consider next year, not this year, it's too late, to take maybe 5 departments of medium to larger size and actually implement zero-based budgeting in those 5 departments? And I just want to make sure that I'm clear between the two differences from my colleagues. Zero-based budgeting involves resetting a base by starting a budget at 0 and ignoring what was spent previously. and identifying the resources required to complete a particular mission, whether it's trash collection or whatever, and then determine what those costs will be. That's the zero base. And the program-based budgeting, according to the definition, is organizing all costs around specific program delivery, which can be at a macro level or broken down, what it costs to run a specific health clinic. But for example, currently the city lump sums its benefit costs and pension costs for the entire government. And to switch to a program-based budget, these costs would have to be spread proportionally across programs. Clearly, there's commentary in our body here that I think if there's a possibility, we'd like to see the beginning, and realizing it's a monumental task, but the beginning of taking maybe 5 departments, maybe a commitment to implement zero-based budgeting in those 5 areas and gradually putting this in place. And I know I've heard before that in some major cities it hasn't had a major effect, but I think until we actually do that, we're not going to know.
I think you asked the budget director the same question last week.
I did.
Yeah, I'm just going to go with her answer.
What was her
I
answer?
don't remember. I have to go look at the transcript, but
Her answer was they didn't think it had an impact, but I'm not sure that I agree with that. I think there are some departments that I've seen where it would have an impact. An example is the prison department. But I think there are many departments where if we implemented zero-based budgeting, we would see tremendous savings. And I don't see why we wouldn't take 5 departments and try to do it. I'm not asking for everybody, but you can pick the 5, but pick 5 areas where...
I mean, even 5 would be
a lot.
A lot, yeah. I mean,
What's
it's
reasonable?
a lot of work.
Is 3 reasonable?
Let us talk about that. I don't want to.
Okay.
I don't remember the answer from last week, so
All right. Thank you very much. Thanks for today. Thank you, Council President.
Thank you, Councilman. Chair recognizes Councilwoman Gimm.
Thank you very much, Council President. So, once again, I just, we ask this question routinely, and Councilman Dom just asked it, but for the record, CAMA is still on track for 2019?
Correct.
Okay, with the same vendor?
Same Tyler, yeah. That was quick. The time flew by,
Yeah,
didn't
that
it?
time really flew by.
Yeah.
I know when we connect, it can just go like that. But, and the substantive difference between when CAM is implemented versus the annual manual assessments that we're doing right now are what?
So it's really about efficiency. So the communication between BRT, OPA, revenue will be improved. Will also mean that data collection will be more efficient, so that when we're trying to defend assessments against appeals, we'll have better information for that too. So it's really all about kind of efficiency and having more data at our hands.
Okay. And similarly, I know this came up last week, but there was a concern that some of our numbers from OPA came in late, and thus the school district was kind of caught off guard a little bit when it presented its lump sum budget. This is the second year in a row that OPA has had somewhat late assessments. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, and it's not really that they're late for their schedule. They are, by state law, required to have their certified assessments done by the end of March. And they schedule to get them done as close to that date as possible, so that the numbers are as fresh as possible when they're actually used for tax purposes the following year. So the way the system is set up, it's really built so that, unfortunately, those numbers will come after the budget is introduced. And because OPA really focuses on the individual assessment rather than caring what the tax numbers are, because they care about the accuracy of individual properties, they don't have a great sense of what the overall number is going to be really until the end of March, which is kind of why the last couple of years wound up with numbers that were larger than we expected.
Doesn't that undermine the validity of budgets that are then presented to council and to the public ahead of those numbers?
I mean, in some ways, all of our tax revenues are just based on projections. So they're all going to kind of, where revenues come in are going to be different from what we project. I think, as we talked about before, what will really help with those numbers is when we're doing assessments regularly. You really won't see those kind of big jumps from one year to the next. so that we typically build about a 3% increase. It's more likely what you're going to see going forward.
And CAMA won't necessarily change that, is that right, because of the timing?
No, CAMA will just make it easier to do assessments annually, but they won't change the timing because that's a state law requirement.
Okay. I mean, I do still think it's a concern, and we should, as you said, like, as we start to stabilize, maybe that will become less of a dramatic change, but the fluctuation seems to be a pretty serious issue, and we need to think about what that looks like for next year so we don't encounter this for the third year.
And I do
in a row.
think that will stabilize as we go forward.
So Economy League published an interesting statistic that said that in 2017, Philadelphia lost 12% of I guess, how do you phrase it? I guess had a 12% loss on appeals of residential property and 15% loss on appeal for commercial and industrial property. Their argument is that this is significantly behind other peer cities, which average about 5 to 7% appeal losses. Could you talk a little bit about that? I know that we've gone back and forth about concerns about the dragging out of the appeals process. This is a different kind of issue in which we're losing far more on appeal at significant rates that can have some serious impact on budgeting as well. There was a question raised about a sort of ad hoc nature around reassessments, and whether the city is planning on tracking the appeals process to make sure that we can identify some of the outstanding issues and fix them.
Yeah, so I haven't seen that, but I'm going to tell you just a couple of things. One, this year, to help with the appeal process, OPA brought in an outside firm, so that should help in terms of defending appeals. The other thing, too, is, as we said a couple of minutes ago, that when CAMA is in place, we'll be better able to pull data together for defending appeals. So you should see that appeal loss number go down over time.
And again, just for clarity, we're going to keep close track of these to identify whatever the outstanding issues are?
Yeah, we get, OPA sends us weekly reports on the number of appeals that have been heard and the results of those appeals. So we keep a close eye on it.
Okay, thank you.
Good, Councilwoman? Good. Chair recognizes Councilman Dom.
Thank you, Council President. Just two quick questions. The number, I think we had a briefing last week on assessments, and if I recall, the average assessment was 11 to 12% increase, ballpark.
Right.
On residential. And what number of the total properties in the city are going to receive an assessment change up?
So, up. So there are about 540,000 total properties, maybe 450 residential. Of those 450, about 3/4 will see an assessment up. About a quarter that'll see decreases, a small percent that won't see any change.
Some will see decreases too, though.
About a quarter will see decreases.
So 3/4 will have their assessment go up.
Yeah, there's a small percent in there, I think less than 1%, that won't see a change.
And when you factor in the 11% assessment change and you do the math, what is the new dollar figure break even for an individual homeowner not having an increase in taxes?
So the way we looked at it at the median, what your increase would have to be to break even, and it's about 8.7%.
So but if my home was worth $200,000 and I received this increase in assessment of 11% on average, and I also had the 4.1 with the homestead blended in, what is the break even point?
It's probably somewhere around 110.
110,000?
Probably, yeah. If you were at exactly 11%.
Right. So anyone who had an 11% increase with the 4.1 and there were homes over 110,000 might see some negligible increase in taxes.
Correct. Yeah.
And I just wanted to make a comment. I know last week I made the comment that in 1970-75 the city had 2,050,000 population. Today we have 1,580,000, almost 500,000 less. Back then we had 27,000 city employees. I think today we have 27 or 28. And I don't know who, maybe it was Anna, but somebody mentioned to me the uniform people, had increased. But in 1975, we had 8,127 police officers. And today we have, I think, less than 6,400.
Yeah, what you'll actually see if you look back over time, because we did this analysis maybe 10 years ago, is that there's an increase primarily in what typically considered county services. So we have more DHS staff than we had before. We'll have more prison staff. We'll have fewer typical municipal functions, like far fewer employees in Fairmount Park or fewer for streets. So there's been a shift in what type of employees we have, which has been kind of marked over.
So it's in the social services, the services we provide.
County functions. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much for your answering questions. Say thank you, Council President.
Thank you, Councilman. Chair again recognizes Councilwoman Gimm.
Thank you very much, Council President. In the late 1990s, I think, then Mayor Rendell instituted a pilot program on some of the city's largest nonprofits, universities, and others, mostly, recognizing the importance of large civic investment around embracing the city as it faced potential bankruptcy and having it turn itself around. I know that, that was a program that existed back then. It brought in, I think it was based on roughly a third of the nonprofit's assessed real estate value. And, it eventually sunsetted out. Has there been any discussion about what that may look like now? Now, I understand, I want to get out of the realm of the legal argument. I think it's pretty clear that this is not about whether we can force nonprofits to participate in the pilot program. But it is about recognizing that as we embrace another large initiative that needs public support, which is our schools, that our city's largest nonprofits, universities, hospitals, and the like, some of whom have grown to become, some of the largest institutions in our city, do play an important role. And that there could be another opportunity largely done through dint of, the civic embracing and pride and investment in our school system, recognizing that funding is really the issue, not support of the schools, because we recognize that a lot of these entities do serve our public schools. They provide internship programs. They send their people out. I absolutely embrace and am grateful to them. But this is specifically an issue about school funding. Has there been discussion within your department about what that would look like? How much, if we looked at 33% of assessed real estate value from large nonprofits, not from small ones, but from the largest nonprofits, what that might bring in potentially?
We did not look at that. We can do that analysis and get back to you on that.
I think it would help just to hear what might be. I think back then it was not all the nonprofits in the city, it was just the largest ones. And again, it's another situation where it could be a potential sunset. It doesn't have to last forever, but it is about helping us over the next 5 years, recognizing that they play a significant role in our city and also could play a significant role in helping bring back investments to the school district as well.
So we can do that analysis.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman. There appears to be no other questions for these witnesses. I want to thank you very much.
Thank you.
As usual, be prepared to be called back. Thank you. Next up, we will have the city treasurer. And why don't we bring the sinking fund department up also? Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
You can state your name for the record, and please proceed with your testimony.
Rashia Johnson, City Treasurer. Good afternoon, Council President Clark and members of Council. I'm Rashia Johnson, City Treasurer. Joining me today are Christian Dunbar, Deputy City Treasurer for Debt Management, Christopher Swartz, Deputy City Treasurer for Banking and Investment, and Matthew Bowman, Executive Director of the Sinking Fund Commission. I'm pleased to provide testimony on the City Treasurer's Office for fiscal year 2019 operating budget. The proposed fiscal year 2019 general fund budget totals $1.6 million, an increase of $531,000 over fiscal year 2018 estimated obligation levels. The increase is primarily due to the addition of funds for an outside consultant to assist with the consolidated cash account reconciliation. The remainder of my written testimony that you have lays out the Treasurer's Office key initiatives and activities. I appreciate the opportunity to provide testimony regarding the proposed fiscal year 2019 budget for the Treasurer's Office, and I'm happy to answer any questions at this time.
All right. Second best testimony today.
I'm trying to, channel Rob a little bit.
Following Rob DeBose model. All right, that's great. Just had a couple of questions.
Sure.
And then I don't know if you had an opportunity to check earlier. Okay, well, let me get these two out of the way. In your testimony, you highlight the investment management services, or RFP,
Yes.
essentially to build diversity and a larger pool of eligible investments. Has the city's investment management policy changed in response to the recent months of market volatility? Because it has been somewhat challenging. So are we looking to invest differently? Are we being more cautious? Or are we taking a wait-and-see attitude with respect to our investment strategy?
Well, for the Treasurer's Office, and our investment policy is very short in duration and very conservative.
Okay.
So right now we're on the very short end. A lot of government, treasuries, agencies, things of that nature. Nothing. We're very risk averse because we know.
I actually know that.
But we are looking at our investment policy because it's time to just take a look at it, and we are looking at it to update it and dust it off to make sure that it is current and relevant.
Okay. On your, this is actually some interesting news. Page 3 of your testimony, you show a MWDB contract participation goal of 30% for FY17 and 18.
Mm-hmm.
And according to your testimony, participation rate in 17 ended in 44%, and FY18 shows 57% achieved so far.
Yes.
So I guess my question is, what is it that you're doing that has gotten to a point where I'm quite excited about these rates? And if so, is it transferable to other departments?
Well, one, it's important to me, and we take a look at it with every opportunity that we have, whether it's on the investment management side. One, a reason why we did the RFP to bring a little bit more diversity, as well as widen our bench on the investment management side, and then with our bond transactions as well, making sure that we have qualified, talented professionals, just not our workforce, but also our professionals that look like the makeup of the city of Philadelphia.
All right. Okay. Well, I want to commend you on that, because I think that in the past there has not been enough emphasis put on the professional services side, particularly as it relates to government, in terms of having a real strong participation goal/rate. And I want to commend you on that.
Thank you.
I think that you may want to put out a little template, because at the end of the day, I just come from the school. If you really want to do it, you can figure out a way to do it. If you really don't want to do it, then it's not going to happen. And so I want to commend you so much for continuing to do that.
Thank you.
Last but not least, with respect to the earlier question, in terms of the administrative fees/costs associated with the loan service versus what we've been.
So again, from the proposals we had, with average loan size, it's like almost 30%, and then we just did a quick, rough and dirty, not public query, and usually those fees range between like the 4 to 7%.
4 to 7 versus 30. Okay.
Yes. So we'd like to streamline that a little bit more to
A whole lot more.
Yeah.
All right. So in terms of that conversation around, I don't know if you kind of indicated that you were going to be having a conversation. Is there any remote legitimate basis for why it's 30? Is it because of the risk associated with the loan product, or why 7 to 40, 30? I mean, that's a big gap.
You can go ahead.
If I can jump in, Council President, Christian Dunbar, Deputy City Treasurer. I think it really starts with the relative loan size, right? So if you look at most typical loans, particularly when we're talking about home improvement loans, you could get loans from 50, 100 plus more. These loans are relatively low, so those fixed costs are going to have a greater effect in terms of the rate than a loan of $100,000 size. So the average loan size here is probably going to be somewhere around $10,000. That's what we're sort of projecting. And then because of the population we're serving, and I know your office and Councilwoman Parker's office want to make sure we brought down the rate, and that there's a cost there. There's a cost associated with the program intermediaries to really help folks understand their credit and get into this program. There's a cost associated with getting this information out. And so all those costs, when you add them up to a relatively low loan size, is what really drives up the cost of this program, which is something we're working on to try to see where places we can try to drive down that cost, and then potentially see if the average loan size, if we can increase those loan sizes, then I think you have a bit of a balance. But it's difficult to serve this population, and make it cost effective at the same time. So those are some of the challenges we're running into now.
So in terms of the 4 to 7%, is that comparable to the loan size? I mean, when you ask that question, is it a loan number similar to what
Comparable
we're
to the loan size, but maybe not the demographics.
I understand.
Yes.
No, I know the demographic.
Mm-hmm.
People. Well, that's the banking world.
Right.
They're extremely conservative, and I still believe they got some other stuff going on that has nothing to do with the financial aspect, but that's the social policy. With respect to our accounts for depositories, do we put any requirements on them as it relates to, such as an example, when we try to get a response for an RFP that we put out for some service, such as participating in a loan program such as the one we're interested in, is there any relationship to responses to programs such as that to our ultimate selection process, or do we simply look at the bottom line in terms of the fees associated with handling our payroll account as an example? RFPs and the selection, I'm assuming in this particular world you associate or you attach certain point system. I don't know exactly how you all do it, but if you have a institution that's more socially responsive in terms of where we may ultimately want to put our money, is that taken into an account versus one that may just give us a good number in terms of servicing our accounts? I know it was a long question.
Of
but
course.
you kind of get my gist.
Yeah, I get where you're going. Of course,
the bottom line is, you want to have my money.
Yeah, we look at
I
fees.
need you to participate in this program.
Yes, we definitely look at fees, but then we also look at to see what the particular depositories are doing in the community. But a lot of times they may have various programs, but we did encourage all of our depositories to take a look at this RFP. If I'm not mistaken, there was a pre-bid conference where several of our authorized depositories participated, but unfortunately did not respond. Now, what happens on the back ends internally, I can't speak to that, but we do encourage them.
So what level of requirement can we put in that? So we just shifted our payroll account to Citizens Bank, and they were one of the earlier respondents in terms of level of interest. Well, let's look at it, but then we come back, no response. Can we require people to do that? I know we're the government. We're supposed to have some limitations on what we can do. But not to even give me a response. At least give us a response that we say, well, that's too high. But don't.
requirement to participate in our programs. I mean, I'm not an attorney, but we have to be careful. We can't govern how they do business.
But if we
But we can govern where we put our money.
We can definitely govern where we put our money and what we do with it, yes.
But if we took a step back, Council President, when we think about this, the size of this program and the viability of the program, I think.
Well, not just that program. I'm just saying generally. 'Cause
Right,
I know this is a new program, but just generally.
But no, we do, encourage anyone that does business with us, depositories or not, or that want to do business, and hey, we have this RFP coming out. We make sure they're on the list. If you have any questions, we encourage that.
Well, how do you encourage it? I mean, banks are like bottom line kind of people. I mean, I don't have to put my money over there. You might tell me we can't make you participate in the program, but I don't have to put my money over there. Like myself personally, I shouldn't say this in a public venue, but what I heard, I used to buy certain ties. I go to the store and get ties. And this particular store used to sell ties that was named after a guy that lived down 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, right? And then he ran for whatever, president and all that, I stopped buying those ties, right? Because he was like out there, right? Right? That was a choice I made, and I'm no longer investing. So from a government perspective, you can't make me put my money in your bank, right?
That is actually true, yes.
So you need to sometimes you got to send a signal, and I can't make you, but conversely, I don't really have to put my money over here. And maybe I want to go over here with somebody that's going to participate much more aggressively as it relates to the social policies that we have here. I guess I'm just pushing the envelope. I need to know, I guess, legally what restraints you all have.
I guess if I could chime in, the banks do participate in some of the things that we want them to, right? If we're talking about some of the larger programs that we're doing. We have north of $1 billion in letter of credit support. And essentially the bank is lending us their balance sheet to backstop some of our variable rate debt. So there are a lot of things that, and in that sense, we're getting good prices, at least we would argue. So there are a lot of other things besides some of the programs that we're talking about that we do leverage the bank to ensure that they come to the table and provide the city with the level of credit and things that we need, whether it's interest rate, whether it's again, the immediate thing I can think about is the balance sheet support, which is important to how we operate from a city perspective. And so some of those larger programs, they are at the table to ensure
But that's fiscal. That's not social.
That's
I'm talking about social programs. You're talking like a banker. Right? So I guess I understand.
I mean, I think, again, all the banks have social programs. Obviously, Councilman Johnson recently talked about the disparity. So all the banks have these programs in place. And so we need to sort of figure out how we can work with our banking partners to ensure that we can support each other as it relates to solving these real important social issues in our community. We can only talk about the programs that we put in front of them. And this particular one right now we thought would be challenging to put in front of them, just given how they operate, and the cost is so high, which is why some of the banks are not interested.
You won't get the numbers down. I know all that. You're going to get the numbers down, right? And then we'll proceed with a program to help people, because at the end of the day, the money we're talking about depositing in the banks are the taxpayers' money. So the taxpayers should benefit as a result of having all that money in those particular banks. All right, you know what? I'm not going to belabor the point right now, because I do have other colleagues, and I'm over my time limit. But you get my gist.
We get it, and we can definitely.
You should probably expect something in a more formalized way.
Okay.
In terms of trying to, as you say, encourage lending institutions to participate in some of the programs we'd like to see them do.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chair recognizes Councilwoman Bass.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Welcome, Councilman.
And actually, I'm going to pick up where you left off just a little bit, because I do think that our banks do have a social responsibility. That those that we're doing business with have a responsibility to the city of Philadelphia, and that we make this a wonderful place to want to be, to want to do business, to want to establish banks and branches throughout our network and based in Philadelphia and throughout our region. And so we should have some expectations that there is going to be a level of civic participation in what's happening in the life of the city. And so I just wanted to put that out there. Also, I wanted to talk a little bit about Wells Fargo, and because we are expected to operate at a higher standard, by our citizens here in Philadelphia. So when Wells Fargo was removed as a city depository, I believe that it was a good thing and in the interest of all of our citizens. And, it says to all of the people here in the city of Philadelphia and beyond that we stand with you and we stand against predators and people who operate in a predatory fashion. So I was glad we took the action. I applaud the action. But I want to just be clear, are there other accounts or do we do other business with that institution? Do we have any other accounts? Do we do other banking services? Any direct business? Anything at all with the city of Philadelphia?
Yes, we still use Wells Fargo for general banking service, consolidated cash, lockbox services. So they still do have some city service. They still supply the city with services.
What's the tune of that? How much is that? Would you guesstimate?
As of the end of February, the cash balance on that was it 286 million?
Say again?
286 million.
Combined, all of this?
Yes.
Okay. So I take it then that we don't have any sort of policy in writing or just in terms of mode of operation that states that we're not going to do business with lenders or organizations, companies, whatever, what have you, that are clearly operating in a predatory way. And Philadelphia is not the only city that has a lawsuit, as you know, against Wells Fargo. It's, throughout the nation that they've really just been a bad actor. And so do we plan to have some sort of a policy that really calls out folks who are, who are really going beyond redlining, but just really operating in the worst possible way, because it affects our neighborhoods. It affects what happens in our neighborhood. It affects, the ability for people who live in a neighborhood to be able to buy a home in the neighborhood and to maintain and repair their properties. And so without access to capital, for a lot of people, it's not going to happen. And so our neighborhoods deteriorate. They deteriorate. We can't afford to fund them or to put enough money into them through a basic systems repair or the different programs that we have here in the city. So we really do need to rely on the lending community to be able to do as much as possible to make sure that, that these loans, these opportunities, have an opportunity to move forward.
So as far as a policy, we don't have a broad brush policy. We kind of take it case by case, and hence why it was time to do RFP for payroll, hence why we did something differently from Wells Fargo, even though they had it historically for a long time. Also with that, because with the lending disparity study, all of our authorized depositories are required to give us their social, the kind of CRA, what they're doing in the communities. Our payroll depository is required to do it on a quarterly basis, and we had that with Wells Fargo as well as our new payroll depository of Citizens Bank. And then they're also, all of our authorized depositories are required to give us that. We have the historical information from the study, but then we also ask them to give us their goals and what they plan to do in the community in the upcoming years. And that was made, I think, last week in the hearing, and the request to supply council with that information.
So you have supply council with that information?
No, we will get that too.
Okay.
Yep.
Because I'd like to see who we're doing business with.
Okay.
And what their CRA, the actuality of their goals have been for the last few years. Because what I've seen from a lot of our large institutions is that it's almost to a point where they don't even pretend to do any significant amount of work in the neighborhoods. And the amount of lending that is done versus the overall amount of lending is shameful, in my opinion.
And then also along with that, so we started it last year, but we're committed to doing a full effort this year once this disparity study comes out, is the Commerce Department, the Treasurer's Office, as well as the Office of Diversity and Inclusion, to sit down with all of our authorized depositories and talk about the findings and what's in those studies and how we can partner together for them to be better stewards in the communities.
I think that because we know that with the administration in Washington, that rules for investing in low-income and minority communities, we know that the rules are laxed under this administration, and that they are likely to become even more laxed. And so I would like to see a policy by the Treasurer's Department in terms of when we are doing business with some of these different providers that, we have a written policy in terms of what will be acceptable and what will not be acceptable, without exception, without waivers. Because when folks come to us and want a $286 million account with the city of Philadelphia, that we have an opportunity to say, you don't meet our threshold. You don't meet the requirements that we are considering.
Now, we just want to be careful because that's we have our the resolution where the lending disparity comes from, the study comes from, and New York took our study and took it one step further with that type of policy, and that's when the banks sued them and they had to throw out the whole thing. So we just have to be careful, but we will work closely together to see what we can put in place.
Yeah, I think we could take the New York example and figure out what they did and how we can avoid, how Philly can make it better than New York.
Okay.
So whatever they did, I'm not sure, but I'm certain that we can find our way around what was done in New York so that we can, when folks come to the table and they want to do business with us, it's about dollars. I certainly get that. It's about investing. It's about investing the taxpayers' money so that we get the kind of return that helps us to be able to function and to run the city. But it's also about how are we getting those dollars? Every dollar is not a good dollar. And if you've gotten it by declining or, basically working against an entire neighborhood, redlining an entire community, then those aren't good dollars. It's not good money. And so we have to be cautious of, who's coming and how they're coming and what they've done to our neighborhoods is my point here.
Okay.
Okay. And my bell didn't ring it? Okay, good. I think so. And one other quick question.
Yes.
Do we have any funds invested into manufacturers of guns, ammunition, firearms?
No, not
in any of our investment portfolio? Okay. All right. Thank you. That's all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Chair recognizes Councilman Don.
Thank you, Council President. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I wanted to follow-up question on Council President's, the costs of if we had $10 million to lend out to individuals at $10,000 each, you were saying the costs were 30%? Did I hear that correctly?
That's correct.
And the cost 30% of the $10 million?
From the proposals we've received from the RFP we put out, that's correct.
So just to be clear, we want to lend $10 million to, let's just say, $10,000 increments. They're going to charge us $3 million of the $10 million to do the work?
From their proposal, that's correct.
Just for the record, that is insane.
This is why we haven't gone to the market to do the bond deal yet. We want to fine-tune that and shave that and sharpen that.
But let me ask you a question. When you go for a loan of $10 million, the worst case is the bank might charge you 1 point for the loan. Maybe there's a better way for us to do this through guaranteeing the loans and letting the banks just lend them directly.
We looked at that as an option, but did not get any responses from that perspective with the RFP we put out.
But I would say I would go to our lenders and make it a strong request, because 30% is unacceptable.
Agreed. Yep.
Let me ask you a separate question. I want to discuss the reconciliation of bank accounts.
Yes.
Do you know when the last time the payroll account for the city was reconciled?
Go ahead. Well, the current, we switched over to Citizens Bank in, what was that, July 1. That is current, but the historical one with Wells Fargo, the last time was December 2010.
Are you saying that we haven't reconciled the payroll account from December of 2010 to today, to 6 or 9 months ago?
That's correct.
That's like 7 years of not reconciling. I mean, individuals reconcile every month. We didn't reconcile for 7 years the payroll account? Why did that happen?
Go ahead. I'm sorry? Well, one, I can't speak to historically as to why, but this is why, one of the reasons we have an outside consultant coming in, because when I came on and realized there were several accounts that hadn't been reconciled in many years, and saw the ongoing findings, wanted to make sure that we could clean that up.
What are the other accounts that haven't been reconciled?
Go ahead.
Sorry, this is I'm Chris Schwartz, Deputy City Treasurer. One of the other bigger accounts that have not been reconciled and has been noted in the Controller's report for some time has been the general disbursement account for the City of Philadelphia.
Can you talk into the mic?
Yeah, sorry, it's the general disbursement account.
General disbursement?
Accounts payable, essentially.
How much in dollars are we dealing with there?
Currently in that account, I believe there's roughly about $42 million in kind of check flow.
And when was the last time that was reconciled?
That was reconciled, again, approximately 7 years ago.
7 years ago?
Yeah.
I'm confused. I thought the job of the Treasurer's Office is to reconcile accounts on a monthly basis.
That's correct.
So are you saying that we didn't do the job correctly for those 7 years?
I'll say
I can't quite say we weren't doing the job correctly, because again, I can't speak to historical, but it was an open item that we're now addressing, one with staff and then bringing in outside to catch that up, because that is a problem and we want to clean it up.
And are there any other accounts we didn't reconcile?
The general disbursement account and the payroll accounts are the primary accounts that have not been reconciled.
Is there a pension payroll account that had to be reconciled?
That is actually reconciled.
That's current.
That's current.
And so I'm just trying to understand. My time's up. I'm going to ask you this last question. Is there anyone else asking questions? Okay. In the reason why I bring this up, I was reading through the June 30th, 2017 reports, and on page 151, it says there's currently a discrepancy between the account balance of the consolidated cash account as shown on the city's records and as shown on the records of the bank at which the cash balance of such account is maintained. The reported balance on the city's records is higher than the account balance on the bank's records by approximately $33.3 million. The city has engaged the services of an auditing firm to reconcile this discrepancy. This was 9 months ago. What is the status of that $33.3 million that we show on our records but not in our bank?
Okay.
So we have put out the RFP and selected a outside accounting firm to come and help us with that. again, that is a fluctuating balance. We are reconciling that on a monthly basis and finding some historic balances or historic transactions that do go against that. Again, it is a work in process. We do have the accounting firm coming on, I think, within the next month.
We actually meet with them.
But let me ask you a question. In the past, we had our own people doing the balancing of these accounts. Why wouldn't we have hired our own people to balance these accounts? Why do we need an outside firm? Is it because this wasn't done for 7 years and there's so much catch-up?
That's correct. That's why I requested to have a firm come in, because there was the catch-up. And in my timeline that I presented, it was easier to have an outside firm come in and work with us and just to solely focus on that, while we have an actual person, we have city employees working on the current. So
Let me just say this.
Yes.
We are theoretically a board of directors of a company called the City of Philadelphia, with a budget that's approaching $4.6 billion and $4 or $5 billion of capital, and plus the school district. And no board of directors would allow accounts not to be balanced for 7 years. And that's mind-boggling to me. You guys are in accounting, and I assume is that normal accounting practice?
that is not normal accounting practice, and that's why I've been trying to get that cleaned up and tidied up and moving forward, so that is not an issue going forward in the treasurer's office.
Will you hire people, once we get this cleaned up, in the treasurer's office to do this reconciliation on a monthly basis?
We have them on board now. They were approved, and we have the bodies on board for the ongoing, yes.
Okay. Am I out of time, or? Okay. I'm flabbergasted by the 7 years, I gotta tell you. Especially when we're dealing with, we have in the report from June of 17 that we were short 33 million. I'm gonna tell you that if it's our money, I'd be up all night figuring this thing out. This is a lot of money we're dealing with.
And it's something that we've been highly focused on from the beginning.
I know, but it's been since June where we're trying to engage the people. I would engage them immediately. It could be a theft. I don't know what's going on here. We don't really know what's going on. Okay. Your testimony states in the budgetary request for 17 positions for fiscal year 19, yet the actual budget states 16 positions. Which one is accurate?
It's actually 17 positions.
17, okay. And then in your forecasting models, are you predicting interest rates to increase or decrease over the next several years?
We have an escalator for increase.
Increase?
Yes.
I guess my second question to that would be then, if we're forecasting rates to increase, why do we take an adjustable rate on 400 North Broad versus a fixed rate?
Well, we didn't take an adjustable rate. It is actually fixed rate for the first 9 years. And when we put out the RFP, we got the best deal that was in the market at that time for the 9 years.
We can differ on that one.
Okay.
It's okay? And I was curious as to the process we use to determine what bonds are going to be refunded, refinanced. What is the process we use for that?
Well, we have a debt policy that lays out what's in the steps with regards to refunding, but the first thing we look at is to make sure each maturity has 3% savings. And as you know, with tax reform that came in place, there's no more advance refunding, so we only have the ability to current refund bonds. So that are the bonds that have, most of our bonds have 10-year calls, so that are callable within that 90-day window, but they have to meet at minimum 3% overall savings, as well as a positive maturity by maturity savings.
3% over the term of the loan?
Right. Over the term of the refunding, that's correct.
And in the general obligation refunding bond series in 2017, it was $865 million. Was that refinancing old debt, or did we take on some new debt?
Say that one more time, I'm sorry.
That's okay. In the general obligation refunding bond series 2017, it was $262,865,000. Was that refinancing old debt, or is there some new debt included in that?
That's all old debt.
All old debt?
Yes.
Okay. And you know the terms of that series, the interest rate and term?
Well, they had varying maturities of interest rate, but we can get the detail for you.
Okay. And are we saving money? Do you know what the overall savings was of that refunding? Any idea?
Say that again, I'm
Was
sorry.
there a savings in that refund, in that refinance?
Yes, the total savings was $25 million, or either a net present value savings of 9.63%.
And where's that $25 million going?
It goes back into the general fund.
Is that $25 million a one-time savings or annual?
No, that's the total, the annualized savings, the
Over
total.
the term?
Is over the
25
term of the
million.
life of the loan, yes.
And today, what are the current interest rates that we would look for in general obligation debt, just a range in today's market? What would you say they are?
Right now, well, we're looking to do the art museum project, so, and a small current refunding as well. And we've been looking in the market, and right now, the average all-in is around a little under 4, like 3.7.
That's good. So based on that, should we be looking at doing more refinancing, especially since our bond rating went down a little? We have the potential that may change the ratings. Should we be looking at more refinancing to lock in that 3.7?
Well, at this time, we can only do current refundings, so we can only refund bonds that are callable within the 90-day window, but we are monitoring to see what is out there that we can refund.
So on bonds that aren't callable, is there a payment penalty involved?
Yeah, you have to escrow to maturity, so then you lose all of your savings because you're actually escrowing that the payment to the end of the bond's life.
Okay. In the budget, there's why are 2018 estimates for the investment and banking program $22 million more than what was budgeted?
I'm sorry.
In the budget for 2018,
Mm-hmm.
you have estimates for what's called the investment and banking program in your budget. It says $22 million more than what was budgeted was spent.
Is that interest? Sorry, just looking at the budget.
I can show it to you offline. I don't want to. We can show it to you offline. If
Okay.
You like. Can you just explain what are the other government's non-tax revenues that make up $471 million in your fiscal year 19 budget?
Go ahead. Go ahead. It's
Sorry, a lot of that is made up
PICA.
of the PICA, the money, the excess that we get back from PICA after we pay them the various taxes that they.
So you're saying we're getting back $471 million a year from PICA?
That's the estimated number, yeah.
That's the estimated number there.
So I wasn't here, I don't know if you were here, Council President, but back in time, I guess, we instituted a 1.5 increase on the wage tax to pay the PICA bonds. And this is the excess that's not going to the bonds, that's coming back to us?
Yeah, so it wasn't that we implemented 1.5%. The 1.5% of the existing wage tax was redirected to be essentially security for the PICA bonds, and then the debt service would come out of that, but it was always a big multiple of what the actual debt service was. And the debt service has gone down over time. As it goes down, more and more of the PICA tax money comes back to the city, and that revenue is built into our 5-year plan.
Okay. All right, thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, Council
Yeah,
President.
Councilman.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. We're going to take a break. We'll be back at 2:15, and we will.
Do you have?
I'm sorry, sinking
Do you
fund.
want sinking fund to come back at 2:15 or?
I mean, do you want to come back at 2? All right. Read your testimony, sir.
Matthew Wellman, Executive Director of the Sinking Fund Commission.
Treasurer, this threw you under the meeting.
No. I just want.
I can make it very quick. So our budget is entirely for debt service and debt-related payments. Our total all funds request this year is $678.8 million, which is actually a decrease of almost $24 million from last year.
Okay.
And $295 million of that is general fund.
Okay. Thank you. Just state your name for the record.
Matthew Bowman,
Yeah.
Executive Director of the Sinking Fund Commission.
Thank you. We're actually going to be calling you guys back
Okay.
with a couple of things that we didn't get resolved today, and one of them is, you know what? check on the progress of the loan program.
Fair
So you can have a more extensive interaction at that time, sir. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Councilman, hold on. Councilman, you had a question?
Yes, Council President.
Yeah, I'm
A
sorry.
couple quick questions. Just in general, when are payments made for debt service? Are they made monthly or quarterly?
For each particular bond issue, they're made generally twice a year. We actually have payment dates. Most months, we have payments on the 15th and the 1st of the month.
Semi-annual.
Correct.
And when are deposits made into the sinking fund? And what determines the amount of the deposit?
The amount of the deposit is exactly what's due for debt service.
And when are those deposits made?
Generally, just prior to when debt service is paid.
And the breakdown of Class 200 rent payments, it's $110 million. Any idea what that rent covers?
Those are all the city service agreement bond issues, so anything issued through PAID or PMA or PRA.
All the properties the city rents, basically?
Say that one more time, I'm sorry.
The breakdown of Class 200 rent payments of $110 million, I'm just curious what that...
That's the debt service for our city service agreements. So anytime we issue bonds through PAID, the redevelopment authority, the municipal authority, it comes out of that Class 200.
And so then there was a Class 200 decrease, which is good, of $26 million in PMA lease payments. Why did that happen?
It was just the natural roll-off of debt service. So there was no different restructurings or anything. It's just that was the natural.
We like roll-offs. That's good.
Yes.
Anyway, thank you very much. Thank you, Council President.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. We'll be back at 2:15.
Okay.
Thank you. Thanks for your testimony, and at that time, we will have our good friends from pensions. Thank you.